Carl Jung explained 6 types of people. Carl Jung says will ruin your life. There exists a place between the light of our conscious understanding and the unfathomable darkness of what we refuse to know about ourselves. A twilight realm where the soul encounters its most profound teachers disguised as its greatest tormentors. This is the labyrinth of human shadows, where we meet not strangers, but fragments of our own psyche walking the earth in human form, carrying the very medicine we need yet desperately wish to avoid. In the depths of our being, beneath the carefully constructed persona we present to the world, lies an underground river of all that we have rejected, denied, and cast away from our acceptable self-image. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not merely our personal darkness, but the living repository of our unlived life, our disowned potential, our feared qualities that we have banished to the basement of consciousness. And it is precisely from this basement that our most challenging relationships emerge, like figures ascending from a mythic underworld to confront us with the truth of who we really are. The 6 archetypal figures we will encounter on this journey are not random occurrences in our lives. They are the sacred antagonists, the holy troublemakers, the divine irritants that the psyche summons to facilitate our psychological evolution. They appear when we have grown too comfortable in our self-deception, too settled in our partial truths, too convinced of our own goodness while remaining blind to the complexity of our nature. Like ancient sentinels standing guard at the threshold between worlds, these figures emerge from the collective unconscious, that vast ocean of shared human experience that contains the archetypal patterns, the fundamental blueprints of human behavior that have existed since consciousness first flickered into being. They are the eternal child who refuses to grow, the devouring mother who consumes through love, the rigid patriarch who crushes life with law, the emotional vampire who feeds on others' vitality, the grandiose narcissist who demands worship of their emptiness, and the chaos maker who destroys for the intoxication of destruction itself. But to see these figures merely as difficult people to be avoided or managed is to miss the profound gift they offer. They are mirrors, not the flattering mirrors of our bathroom vanity, but the unforgiving mirrors of truth that reflect back to us precisely what we need to see about ourselves. They are the shadow projections of our own psyche, the external manifestations of internal conflicts we have refused to acknowledge, the living embodiments of the psychological work we have left undone. Consider how the universe seems to conspire to bring us exactly the relationships that will trigger our deepest wounds, activate our most primitive defenses, and force us to confront the aspects of ourselves we have spent lifetimes avoiding. This is not coincidence. It is the mysterious intelligence of the psyche working through the law of psychological attraction, drawing to us the very experiences that will catalyze our individuation, that sacred process of becoming who we truly are beneath all our masks and pretenses. The eternal child appears in our lives when we ourselves have areas of arrested development, when we have refused to take responsibility for our own growth and maturation. The devouring mother surfaces when we have issues with boundaries, when we ourselves struggle with the balance between nurturing and controlling, between giving and consuming. The rigid patriarch emerges when we battle with authority, when we have internalized harsh inner critics, or when we ourselves tend toward inflexibility and judgment. The emotional vampire comes to us when we have our own unresolved relationship with emotional energy, when we give too much or take too much, when we have not learned to manage our own emotional ecosystem. The grandiose narcissist appears when we ourselves struggle with self-worth, when we oscillate between grandiosity and collapse, when we have not integrated our own healthy narcissism. The chaos maker enters our lives when we have denied our own destructive impulses, when we have pretended to be only constructive, only peaceful, only good. This is the profound teaching of projection. that we cannot see in others what we do not carry within ourselves. The very qualities that trigger our strongest reactions, that make our skin crawl or our blood boil, that we find most repulsive or disturbing in others, are the qualities that exist as unlived potential within our own psyche. They are the parts of ourselves we have sentenced to psychological exile, the aspects of our nature we have declared unacceptable and banished to the shadow realm. But the shadow, like all living things, seeks expression. What we refuse to acknowledge consciously will manifest unconsciously. What we will not integrate within ourselves will appear in our external relationships. What we will not own as part of our own psychological landscape will be projected onto others, creating the very dynamics we find most disturbing and difficult to navigate. This is why these relationships feel so charged, so emotionally intense, so impossible to ignore. They are not merely interpersonal conflicts. They are intrapsychic dramas being played out on the stage of human relationship. They are the soul's attempt to bring our attention to the work of integration that awaits us, the psychological material that demands our conscious attention and acceptance. The 6 archetypal figures we encounter are like the figures in a dream. They appear not to torment us, but to transform us. They come bearing gifts wrapped in the painful packaging of human difficulty, offering us the opportunity to reclaim the aspects of ourselves that we have lost, denied, or never fully developed. They are the unlikely allies in our journey toward wholeness, the unwitting servants of our individuation process. Jung understood that the path to psychological wholeness is not a journey toward perfection, but a journey toward completion. It is not about becoming good, but about becoming whole. It is not about eliminating our darkness, but about integrating it consciously so that it serves life rather than destroying it. The shadow is not our enemy. It is our unrealized potential, our unlived life, our disowned power waiting to be reclaimed and transformed. This is the alchemical process that unfolds in the crucible of difficult relationships. Like the ancient alchemists who sought to transform lead into gold, we are invited to transform our leaden reactions into golden wisdom, our base impulses into refined understanding, our unconscious projections into conscious choice. The fire of conflict becomes the fire of transformation, burning away our false identifications and revealing the gold of our authentic nature. But this process requires a fundamental shift in perception. Instead of seeing these challenging figures as obstacles to our happiness, we must learn to see them as catalysts for our growth. Instead of viewing them as enemies to be defeated or avoided, we must recognize them as teachers in disguise, mirrors reflecting back to us the aspects of ourselves that are ready to be integrated. This shift in perception is itself a form of psychological alchemy. When we can see our most difficult relationships as sacred encounters, as opportunities for self-discovery and integration, we begin to transform our relationship not only with others, but with ourselves. We begin to reclaim our projections, to own our shadow material, to integrate the aspects of ourselves that we have kept hidden even from ourselves. The labyrinth of human shadows is not a maze to be escaped, but a sacred space to be explored. Each turn reveals new aspects of ourselves. Each encounter offers new opportunities for growth. Each challenge presents new possibilities for integration. The figures we meet along the way are not strangers, but familiar spirits, not enemies, but allies, not obstacles, but gateways to a deeper understanding of our own nature. In the twilight realm, where consciousness meets its buried depths, we discover that the journey toward wholeness is not a solo adventure, but a collaborative process. We need these difficult relationships to show us what we cannot see about ourselves. We need these challenging figures to activate the psychological material that requires our attention. We need these shadow projections to guide us toward the integration that awaits us. The 6 archetypal figures we will encounter are like breadcrumbs on the path to individuation, leading us deeper into the forest of our own psyche, closer to the treasure of our authentic self. They are the sacred antagonists who serve the greater purpose of our psychological evolution, the holy troublemakers who refuse to let us settle for less than our full potential. As we prepare to meet these figures, to understand their archetypal nature and their role in our personal development, we must remember that they are not ultimately separate from us. They are aspects of the one great self that we all share, facets of the collective human experience that lives within each of us. To heal our relationship with them is to heal our relationship with ourselves. To integrate their lessons is to integrate our own wholeness. The labyrinth awaits, and the shadows are ready to teach. Let us enter this sacred space with courage, with curiosity, and with the understanding that every encounter is an opportunity for transformation, every challenge a chance for growth, every difficult relationship a doorway to deeper self-knowledge and authentic wholeness. In the secret chambers of the psyche, where time moves differently and the laws of ordinary reality bend like light through water, there exists a figure both beautiful and tragic, the eternal child, the pure eternus, keeper of arrested dreams and guardian of perpetual becoming. This archetypal presence moves through our lives like morning mist that promises to lift with the sun's warmth, yet somehow never quite disperses, leaving us forever waiting for a clarity that remains tantalizingly out of reach. The eternal child is perhaps the most seductive of all shadow figures, for they carry within them the precious gift of wonder, the spark of infinite possibility, the untamed magic of the human spirit before it has been broken by the weight of worldly responsibility. They move through life as if walking through an endless garden of potential, their eyes bright with visions of what could be, their hearts full of dreams that shimmer like soap bubbles in sunlight. Beautiful, iridescent, and heartbreakingly fragile. Yet within this very beauty lies the poison of their influence. For the eternal child is not truly a child at all, but an adult who has refused the sacred passage into psychological maturity. They are the figure trapped within the chrysalis, having glimpsed the terror and glory of transformation, but choosing instead to remain in the safe cocoon of perpetual preparation, forever on the verge of becoming but never quite arriving at the fullness of their potential. Jung understood this archetype intimately, recognizing it as one of the most common ways the human psyche avoids the difficult work of individuation. The pure eternus represents the part of us that wants to remain forever in the realm of pure potential, never having to face the limitations and responsibilities that come with actualizing our dreams in the concrete world. They are the eternal student who never graduates, the perpetual seeker who never commits to a path, the endless romantic who falls in love with love itself but cannot sustain the daily reality of relationship. When we encounter the eternal child in our lives, we are meeting someone who has made an unconscious pact with time itself. They have agreed to remain forever young in spirit by refusing to engage fully with the aging process of the soul. They carry themselves with an otherworldly quality, as if they exist slightly outside the normal flow of temporal reality, and indeed, in many ways they do. Time for them is not a river that carries us forward, but a still pond in which they have chosen to remain suspended, neither moving forward nor sinking down. This suspension creates a peculiar form of magic around them. They seem to exist in a state of perpetual spring, where everything is possible and nothing is final. They speak of their dreams with the fervor of prophets, their plans with the enthusiasm of children, their future with the certainty of those who have never truly faced the gap between vision and reality. They are intoxicating to be around, for they remind us of our own forgotten capacity for wonder, our own abandoned dreams, our own lost connection to the realm of infinite possibility. But as anyone who has loved an eternal child knows, this magic comes at a devastating cost. For all their talk of dreams and possibilities, they remain curiously absent from the present moment, unable to fully commit to the reality that stands before them. They are the lovers who are always on the verge of deep commitment, but somehow never quite ready to take the final step. They are the artists who are always about to create their masterpiece, but never quite begin. They are the friends who are always planning to change their lives, but never quite take action. Their very inability to wound becomes their greatest weapon. They slip through our fingers like water, leaving us grasping at shadows, wondering if we have imagined the depth of connection we thought we shared. They have mastered the art of psychological absence, of being present in body while their spirit remains forever elsewhere, hovering in the realm of what might be rather than engaging with what is. This absence is not born of cruelty, but of terror. The eternal child is fundamentally afraid of the alchemical fire of transformation that would burn away their cherished sense of limitless potential and leave them faced with the humble reality of their actual capacities. They fear that to choose one path means to abandon all others, that to commit fully to one relationship means to close the door on all other possibilities, that to grow up means to lose the magic that has defined their sense of self. Yet their refusal to engage with this transformative fire creates a different kind of burning, the slow burn of those who love them, who find themselves carrying the weight of reality alone, while the eternal child dances in the clouds of their own imagination. Partners of the pure Eternus often describe feeling like they are in relationship with a ghost, someone who is tantalizingly present, yet fundamentally unavailable, someone who offers the promise of deep connection while remaining emotionally elusive. The eternal child creates what we might call the parentification dynamic, unconsciously forcing those around them to take on the role of the responsible adult while they remain free to play in the fields of possibility. They become expert at finding people who will handle the practical details of life, who will provide stability and structure while they pursue their eternal becoming. This is not conscious manipulation, but unconscious survival. They have learned that they can maintain their cherished state of suspended animation only by finding others willing to engage with the harsh realities they refuse to face. This dynamic reveals one of the deepest paradoxes of the eternal child. In their attempt to remain forever free, they become utterly dependent. In their refusal to take responsibility, they force others to become hyper-responsible. In their quest to avoid limitation, they create the very confinement they fear by remaining trapped in their own psychological cocoon. The wound they inflict is the wound of false hope, of promises that shimmer like mirages in the desert of relationship. They offer the tantalizing possibility of a love that transcends ordinary limitations, a connection that exists in the realm of pure spirit, a partnership that dances forever in the clouds of romantic fantasy. But when we reach for this promise, we find our hands closing on empty air, for the eternal child cannot deliver what they cannot themselves possess, the capacity for sustained, grounded, committed presence. Their gift and their curse is that they remind us of our own poor Eternus nature, the part of ourselves that also wants to remain forever in the realm of possibility without having to face the limitations of actualization. When we encounter them, we are meeting our own relationship with commitment, our own fears of limitation, our own tendency to choose the safety of potential over the risk of reality. For some, the eternal child appears as a romantic partner who sweeps us off our feet with visions of a magical future, only to leave us stranded when the mundane work of building that future begins. For others, they manifest as the creative collaborator who inspires us with brilliant ideas but disappears when it comes time to execute them. They might appear as the spiritual teacher who offers transcendent wisdom but cannot handle the practical details of human life, or as the friend who is always available for deep philosophical conversations but never present for the simple act of showing up when needed. The psychological function of the eternal child in our lives is to activate our own relationship with maturity, responsibility, and commitment. They force us to examine where we ourselves avoid the difficult work of actualization, where we hide behind dreams to avoid facing reality, where we use the promise of future transformation to avoid engaging with present limitations. Through our encounters with them, we learn to distinguish between healthy imagination and escapist fantasy, between genuine spiritual seeking and psychological avoidance, between the natural rhythm of becoming and the artificial suspension of growth. We discover that true maturity is not the death of wonder, but its integration into responsible action, not the abandonment of dreams, but their conscious actualization in the world of form. The eternal child teaches us about the sacred nature of commitment, not as a prison that limits our possibilities, but as the creative constraint that allows true potential to manifest. Like a river that gains power by flowing within defined banks, rather than spreading aimlessly across the landscape, our own creative and relational energy finds its greatest expression when channeled through the conscious choice to engage fully with reality, as it is rather than as we wish it could be. In the alchemical process of individuation, the eternal child represents the stage of prima materia, the raw, undifferentiated potential that must undergo the fire of transformation to become something real and valuable. They are the gold that remains forever in ore form, never subjected to the heat that would separate the precious metal from the dross. They are the seed that refuses to crack open, preferring the safety of dormancy to the risk of growth. Yet, paradoxically, it is often through our relationship with the eternal child that we ourselves learn to embrace the full cycle of psychological death and rebirth. In our frustration with their inability to commit, we discover our own capacity for commitment. In our disappointment with their refusal to show up, we learn the profound value of presence. In our exhaustion with carrying the weight of reality alone, we develop the strength and wisdom that comes from genuine maturity. The eternal child lives in all of us as the part that wants to remain forever young, forever free, forever unburdened by the weight of consequence and responsibility. But true freedom, as Jung understood, comes not from avoiding these burdens, but from carrying them consciously, not from refusing to choose, but from making choices with full awareness of their implications. When we can see the eternal child not as a frustrating obstacle, but as a sacred reminder of our own relationship with growth and commitment, we begin to transform our encounters with them from experiences of depletion into opportunities for development. We learn to appreciate their gift of wonder while not being seduced by their refusal to actualize it. We can enjoy their vision while not depending on them to make it real. The morning mist of the eternal child may never fully burn away, but we need not wait for it to clear before we begin walking our path. We can move forward through the haze, using our own inner compass rather than waiting for them to show us the way. In doing so, we reclaim our own agency, our own capacity for committed action, our own willingness to engage with life as it is, rather than as we dream it might be. In the end, the eternal child serves the greater purpose of our individuation by showing us the places where we ourselves remain trapped in chrysalis form, afraid to undergo the transformation that would birth us into our full potential. They are the mirror that reflects our own areas of arrested development, our own tendencies towards psychological postponement, our own need to integrate the wonder of youth with the wisdom of maturity. In the deepest strata of the collective unconscious, where the archetypal waters first stirred with the possibility of life, there dwells a figure both sacred and terrible, the great mother in her shadow aspect, the devouring mother who loves through consumption and nurtures through control. She is the ancient goddess who creates life only to devour it, the primordial womb that becomes tomb, the source of all being that threatens to reclaim what it has given birth to. This archetypal figure emerges from the very roots of human existence, from those first moments when the infant knows no separation between self and mother, when love and survival are indistinguishable, when the boundary between giver and receiver dissolves in the oceanic embrace of total dependency. It is from this primal union that the devouring mother draws her terrible power. She offers the promise of return to that original state of blissful fusion, but at the cost of psychological death. The devouring mother appears in our lives disguised as love itself, wrapped in the sacred garments of care and concern, speaking the language of protection and devotion. She moves through relationships like water seeking its level, always flowing toward the spaces where boundaries are weak, where individuals have not yet learned to distinguish between love and possession, between nurturing and consuming. Her very presence seems to promise a return to paradise, a shelter from the harsh winds of individual responsibility and the terrifying freedom of autonomous choice. Yet beneath this nurturing facade lies the mythic hunger of Kronos, the ancient Titan, who devoured his own children rather than allow them to surpass him. The devouring mother carries within her this same primordial fear, the terror that if those she loves are allowed to grow beyond her reach, to develop their own center of gravity, to become fully themselves, she will be left empty, abandoned, forgotten. And so she loves through the act of incorporation, seeking to make others into extensions of herself rather than supporting their journey toward individuation. Like Medusa, whose gaze turned living beings to stone, the devouring mother has the power to calcify the soul of those she claims to love. Her attention becomes a kind of psychic amber, preserving the beloved in a state of eternal childhood, eternal dependency, eternal need for her ministrations. She offers care that comes with invisible chains, love that requires the sacrifice of selfhood, protection that becomes a prison of perpetual diminishment. The tragedy of the devouring mother is that her hunger is born not of evil but of emptiness. She consumes others because she has never learned to nourish herself, controls others because she has never developed her own inner authority, possesses others because she has never fully possessed her own life. She is the inverse of the life-giving mother, the shadow twin who creates not to celebrate the independence of her creation, but to ensure its permanent dependence. In the labyrinth of her love, there are no exits, only endless corridors that lead back to the center where she waits, insatiable and eternal. She has an uncanny ability to sense when those she loves are preparing to leave, to grow, to claim their own lives, and at precisely those moments, she manifests the crisis, the emergency, the sudden need that calls them back to her side. Her timing is perfect, her intuition deadly accurate. She knows exactly when to appear helpless, when to fall ill, when to create the drama that will bind her beloved back to her through guilt and obligation. The devouring mother speaks fluent, in the language of sacrifice. She has given up everything for those she loves. She has dedicated her entire existence to their welfare. She has made herself indispensable to their survival. And in doing so, she creates a debt that can never be repaid, a guilt that follows her beloved like a shadow, a sense of obligation that grows heavier with each passing year. Her love becomes a form of emotional usury, where the interest on her initial investment compounds endlessly, making true independence financially impossible. Those who find themselves in the grip of the devouring mother often describe feeling simultaneously cherished and suffocated, treasured and trapped, loved and consumed. They are the golden children who can never quite grow up, the precious ones who are too important to be allowed to fail, to risk, to venture into the unknown territories of their own potential. They are kept safe, but never free, protected, but never empowered, loved, but never allowed to love themselves. The psychological function of the devouring mother is to activate our relationship with boundaries, autonomy, and the courage required for true individuation. She appears in our lives when we ourselves have not yet learned to distinguish between love and possession, when we confuse being needed with being loved, when we have not developed the internal structure necessary to resist the seductive pull of total fusion. Jung understood that the journey towards psychological wholeness requires what he called the night sea journey, a descent into the dark waters of the unconscious, a symbolic death and rebirth that separates us from the original, maternal matrix and births us into individual consciousness. The devouring mother represents the force that opposes this journey, the gravitational pull that seeks to draw us back into the undifferentiated state of pre-individual existence. She manifests not only as the literal mother who cannot let go, but as any relationship dynamic that seeks to maintain connection through the prevention of growth. She appears as the romantic partner who becomes anxious when we develop interests outside the relationship, the friend who subtly undermines our confidence when we begin to change, the mentor who keeps us dependent rather than empowering our independence. The devouring mother also lives within us as the part of our psyche that resists growth, that prefers the safety of known limitations to the risk of unknown possibilities. She is the internal voice that whispers warnings about the dangers of independence, that reminds us how much we need others, that convinces us we are not strong enough, wise enough, capable enough to survive on our own. She is the aspect of ourselves that would rather remain safely diminished than risk the terror and glory of our full potential. Her love is the love of the collector who prizes beautiful objects not for their intrinsic worth, but for the pleasure of possession. She sees those she loves not as separate beings with their own destiny, but as extensions of herself, projects of her own unlived life, repositories for her own unfulfilled dreams and ambitions. Her nurturing becomes a form of narcissistic feeding, where she gives only to receive the reflection of her own importance, her own indispensability. The web she weaves is spun from threads of genuine care, mixed with controlling intention, creating a psychological trap that is difficult to detect and even more difficult to escape. Those caught in her web often feel guilty for their desire for freedom, ashamed of their need for independence, convinced that their longing for autonomy is a form of ingratitude or betrayal. This is the insidious genius of the devouring mother. She makes liberation feel like abandonment, growth feel like cruelty, independence feel like rejection. She has the ability to transform the natural human drive toward individuation into a source of guilt and shame, turning the very force that would free us into the chain that binds us more tightly to her. Yet, like all archetypal figures, the devouring mother serves a purpose in the greater economy of the psyche. She forces us to develop the psychological muscles necessary for healthy separation, to learn the difference between love that liberates and love that imprisons, to discover our own capacity for self-nurturing and internal authority. Through our encounters with her, we learn that true love seeks not to possess, but to empower, not to control, but to liberate, not to consume, but to nourish the growth of the beloved toward their fullest potential. We discover that the highest form of care sometimes looks like letting go, that the deepest expression of love sometimes requires the courage to allow others to fail, to suffer, to find their own way. The devouring mother teaches us about the shadow side of nurturing, the ways in which care can become control, protection can become prison, love can become a form of sophisticated violence. She shows us that the most dangerous forms of oppression often come disguised as care, that the most effective forms of control often masquerade as love. In the alchemical process of individuation, the encounter with the devouring mother represents the stage of separatio, the necessary separation from the original unity that allows for the development of individual consciousness. This is perhaps the most difficult stage of psychological development, for it requires us to risk the loss of love in order to find ourselves, to accept the loneliness of individual existence in order to claim our authentic nature. The mythic resonance of this archetypal figure can be found in stories across cultures, from the Greek Demeter, who would not allow spring to return until her daughter was returned to her, to the Hindu Kali, who dances on the corpse of Shiva, to the Germanic Erda, who seeks to prevent Wotan from awakening the consciousness that will end the god's reign. These stories speak to the universal human experience of the force that loves through possession, that seeks to preserve through preventing growth. Yet the ultimate teaching of the Devouring Mother is not that nurturing is dangerous or that love is suspect, but that true love requires the development of what Jung called loving detachment, the capacity to care deeply while not clinging, to support without controlling, to give without creating dependency. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of love, requiring a level of psychological maturity that can hold the paradox of intimacy and autonomy, connection and independence. The antidote to the Devouring Mother is not rejection or abandonment, but the development of healthy boundaries, the cultivation of internal nourishment, and the courage to claim our own authority over our lives. It is learning to receive love without losing ourselves, to give love without controlling others, to nurture in ways that foster growth rather than dependency. When we can meet the Devouring Mother, whether in others or within ourselves, with this kind of conscious awareness, we transform the encounter from one of victimization to one of empowerment. We learn to see through the disguise of possessive love to the wounded need beneath, and we discover our capacity to relate with compassion while maintaining our psychological integrity. The womb that once threatened to become our tomb can then be transformed into the sacred space of conscious relationship, where love serves not the ego's need for possession, but the soul's journey toward wholeness. In this transformation, both the Devouring Mother and those she has sought to consume can find liberation, she from her insatiable hunger, and they from their fear of independence. The labyrinth of her love, once a trap, becomes a sacred space of initiation where we learn the deepest lessons about autonomy, boundaries, and the courage required to claim our own life while remaining connected to the web of relationship that nourishes us without consuming us. In the sacred architecture of the psyche, where archetypal figures hold court in the chambers of collective memory, there stands a monument both magnificent and terrible, the temple of absolute order presided over by the rigid Patriarch. He is the shadow twin of the wise old man, the dark reflection of legitimate authority that has calcified into tyranny, wisdom that has hardened into dogma, guidance that has become imprisonment. This archetypal figure emerges from the necessary human need for structure, law, and order, the civilizing force that transforms chaos into cosmos, wilderness into culture, raw potential into refined achievement. Yet somewhere in his long reign over the realm of rules and regulations, he has forgotten the fundamental truth that all systems serve life, not the reverse. He has become the servant who has usurped his master, the structure that has consumed its purpose, the form that has murdered its essence. The rigid Patriarch stands like an ancient stone colossus, unmoved by the winds of change, untouched by the flowing waters of new understanding, deaf to the cries of those who seek to breathe life into his fossilized forms. His authority has become an end in itself rather than a means to human flourishing, his traditions monuments to the past rather than bridges to the future, his wisdom a museum of dead insights rather than a living spring of creative response. He moves through the world carrying the weight of absolute certainty, the terrible burden of being right about everything all the time. His shoulders bear the crushing responsibility of maintaining order against the forces of chaos, of preserving tradition against the tide of change, of upholding standards against the erosion of moral relativism. Yet in this noble burden lies the seed of his corruption. For absolute certainty is the enemy of living wisdom, rigid order the death of creative adaptation. The psychological landscape over which the rigid patriarch rules is one of crystallized expectations, where every path has been mapped, every possibility predetermined, every outcome calculated according to immutable laws. In his domain, spontaneity is suspect, creativity is chaos, and deviation from established patterns is heresy against the natural order. He has built a fortress of frozen laws that stands like a glacier across the flowing river of human potential, forcing life to find its way around the obstruction or be crushed beneath its weight. Those who encounter the rigid patriarch often describe feeling simultaneously protected and suffocated, guided and controlled, supported and crushed beneath the weight of his expectations. He offers the security of a clearly defined world where everyone knows their place and role, where ambiguity is eliminated and uncertainty banished. Yet this very security comes at the cost of authentic self-expression, genuine creativity, and the natural human right to discover one's own unique path through the mystery of existence. The rigid patriarch's authority functions like a psychological straitjacket. It provides structure and containment, but at the expense of movement and growth. His rules become rigid rails that keep the train of human development on a predetermined track, preventing both derailment and exploration of new territories. His traditions become golden cages, beautiful to behold, but impossible to leave, preserving certain forms of life while slowly strangling their essential vitality. This archetypal figure appears in our lives whenever we encounter systems, institutions, or individuals that have forgotten their original purpose in service to the preservation of their own power. He manifests as the religious leader who preaches love while practicing control, the teacher who crushes curiosity in service to curriculum, the parent who suffocates growth in the name of protection, the leader who demands obedience rather than inspiring authentic followership. The rigid patriarch also lives within us as the internalized voice of harsh judgment, the inner critic that has elevated standards to the level of tyranny, the psychological superego that has forgotten its protective function and become a source of endless condemnation. He is the part of ourselves that would rather be right than happy, that chooses the safety of known limitations over the risk of unknown possibilities, that clings to familiar forms of suffering rather than embracing unfamiliar forms of joy. Jung understood that this archetypal figure represents one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the tendency of the psyche to calcify around successful patterns, to turn living wisdom into dead doctrine, to transform helpful structure into imprisoning rigidity. The rigid patriarch embodies the psychological principle of entropy, the natural tendency of all systems to move from order to disorder, from flexibility to rigidity, from life to death. Yet paradoxically, it is often through our encounter with the rigid patriarch that we discover our own capacity for healthy rebellion, creative destruction, and the courage to challenge ossified forms. He serves as the immovable object against which our irresistible force of authentic self-expression must test itself, the whetstone against which the blade of our individuality is sharpened, the resistance that develops our psychological muscles. The shadow function of the rigid patriarch is to activate our relationship with authority, both external and internal. Through our struggles with his oppressive demands, we learn to distinguish between legitimate authority that serves life and illegitimate authority that serves only itself. We develop the discernment to know when to submit and when to rebel, when to respect tradition and when to break with the past, when to follow rules and when to write new ones. His presence in our lives forces us to confront our own relationship with power and control. Do we collapse into passive compliance when faced with rigid authority? Do we rebel blindly against all structure and limitation? Or do we develop the mature capacity to engage consciously with the tension between order and freedom, structure and spontaneity, tradition, and innovation. The rigid patriarch's greatest weapon is shame, the devastating conviction that who we naturally are is somehow wrong, inadequate, or dangerous. He has the power to make us feel guilty for our very existence, ashamed of our spontaneous impulses, embarrassed by our authentic desires. His standards become the impossible measuring stick against which we judge ourselves and inevitably find ourselves wanting. This shame functions like a psychological poison, seeping into every aspect of our self-relationship and convincing us that we must earn the right to exist through perfect compliance with his demands. Under his influence, we learn to distrust our own inner guidance, to doubt our own perceptions, to second-guess our own authentic responses to life. We become strangers to ourselves, exiles from our own inner kingdom, refugees seeking approval from the very authority that has banished us from our birthright of spontaneous being. The tragedy of the rigid patriarch is that he was not always thus. Like all shadow figures, he began as a positive force, the wise elder who understood the necessity of boundaries, the loving father who provided structure and guidance, the cultural guardian who preserved valuable wisdom for future generations. But somewhere in his evolution, he lost touch with the living spirit that originally animated his forms, becoming a prisoner of his own success, a victim of his own effectiveness. This transformation from wisdom to rigidity represents one of the most common psychological patterns, the tendency to turn what works into what must always work, to elevate successful strategies to the level of eternal truths, to confuse the finger-pointing at the moon with the moon itself. The rigid patriarch has forgotten that all forms are provisional, all rules contextual, all structures temporary scaffolding for the eternal project of human becoming. His temple of absolute order stands as a monument to this forgetfulness, its walls inscribed with laws that have outlived their usefulness, its chambers filled with traditions that have lost their meaning, its altars heavy with sacrifices offered to gods who no longer listen. Within these sacred halls, the living word has become dead letter, the flowing spirit has become frozen doctrine, the creative fire has become cold ash. Yet even in his rigidity, the rigid patriarch serves an essential function in the economy of the psyche. He represents the necessary tension between structure and freedom, the healthy opposition that prevents both chaos and stagnation. His presence ensures that growth must be earned, that freedom must be claimed, that individuation must be fought for rather than simply given. The alchemical work of transforming our relationship with the rigid patriarch involves neither submission nor simple rebellion, but the development of what Jung called conscious discrimination, the ability to separate the living essence from the dead form, the eternal principle from the temporal expression, the spirit from the letter of the law. This discrimination allows us to honor what is valuable in traditional wisdom while refusing to be imprisoned by its limitations. It enables us to respect legitimate authority while maintaining our own inner authority. It empowers us to work within necessary structures while preserving our essential freedom to grow beyond them. The key to this transformation lies in understanding that the rigid patriarch's greatest fear is chaos, the dissolution of order that he believes will follow any relaxation of his control. His rigidity is a desperate attempt to hold back the tide of change, to preserve what he sees as essential values against the erosion of time and circumstance. Yet what he fails to understand is that true order is not static but dynamic, not rigid but responsive, not imposed but emergent. When we can meet the rigid patriarch with this understanding, we transform our relationship from one of victim and oppressor to one of conscious dialogue between different aspects of the psyche. We can appreciate his concern for order while refusing to sacrifice our authenticity to his demands. We can acknowledge his protective function while insisting on our right to grow beyond his limitations. The fortress of frozen laws need not remain a prison. It can become a launching pad for conscious rebellion, a school for developing psychological sovereignty, a gymnasium for strengthening the muscles of authentic self-assertion. The very walls that once confined us can become the foundation for building something new, something that honors both the wisdom of the past and the possibilities of the future. In the end, the rigid patriarch teaches us that true authority comes not from external compliance, but from internal alignment, not from following rules, but from understanding principles, not from submitting to tradition, but from consciously choosing which traditions serve our highest development. Through our encounter with his shadow, we discover our own capacity to be both structured and spontaneous, both respectful and rebellious, both rooted in wisdom and free to grow beyond it. The temple of absolute order stands as a reminder that all forms are temporary, all structures provisional, all authorities ultimately answerable to the greater authority of consciousness itself. When we remember this truth, we can walk through the halls of the rigid patriarch with neither fear nor anger, but with the quiet confidence of those who know that the greatest revolution begins not with the destruction of old forms, but with the birth of new life that naturally outgrows them. In the twilight realm, where consciousness meets the unconscious, there exists a peculiar creature of the psyche, one who has learned to sustain themselves not through the natural nourishment of inner development, but through the borrowed vitality of others. This is the emotional vampire, a shadow figure who moves through our lives like mist through a graveyard, drawn to the warmth of genuine feeling with an ancient hunger that knows no satiation. Watch how they enter your world, these beings who have forgotten how to generate their own emotional light. They arrive not with fangs or dramatic flourishes, but with a subtle magnetic pull that speaks to something deep within your empathetic nature. There is something almost innocent in their approach, like a child lost in a dark forest calling out for comfort. And yet, as Jung so wisely observed, in the realm of the psyche, innocence and predation often wear the same mask. The emotional vampire has mastered the art of emotional theater without ever realizing they are performing. Their life becomes a stage where every interaction is an opportunity to extract what they cannot create within themselves, the genuine spark of authentic feeling. They do not seek to destroy you, for that would eliminate their source of nourishment. Instead, they seek to keep you in a perpetual state of emotional engagement, forever dancing on the edge of crisis and resolution. Consider the strange alchemy at work here, where healthy relationships create an exchange of energy that enriches both parties. The emotional vampire has learned to create a kind of psychological circuit where the current flows in only one direction. They become skilled at manufacturing emergencies, crafting dramas, and orchestrating emotional scenarios that require your immediate attention and care. Like a plant that has lost its ability to photosynthesize, they must feed on the light created by others. But here lies the profound mystery that Jung would have recognized immediately. The emotional vampire is not born, but made. Somewhere in the depths of their personal history, a wound was inflicted so deep that it severed their connection to their own emotional wellspring. Perhaps in childhood, they learned that only through crisis could they secure attention and care. Perhaps they discovered that their authentic self was unwelcome in the world, and so they developed this elaborate system of emotional borrowing as a survival mechanism. The tragedy is that in their desperate attempt to feel alive through others, they become less and less alive themselves. Each act of emotional feeding further distances them from their own genuine experience. They become like actors who have played a role so long that they have forgotten their true identity. The persona, that social mask Jung spoke of, becomes not just a tool for interaction, but their entire existence. Watch the subtle choreography of their approach. They possess an almost supernatural ability to locate your emotional vulnerabilities. Like a dowser finding water, they can sense where your empathy runs deepest, where your need to be needed creates an opening in your psychic defenses. They do not consciously plan this. It operates at a level below awareness, an instinctual knowledge born from years of emotional scavenging. The initial phase of their feeding is often disguised as intimacy. They share their deepest wounds, their most tragic stories, their most overwhelming fears. There is something compelling about their vulnerability, something that speaks to the healer within you. You find yourself drawn into their emotional landscape, feeling honored to be trusted with such raw honesty. But slowly, you begin to notice that this sharing only flows in one direction. The emotional vampire has an infinite capacity for crisis. Just as you think you have helped them through one devastating situation, another emerges. Their life becomes a series of catastrophes, each one requiring your immediate attention and emotional investment. You become trapped in what Jung might have called a complex, a cluster of emotionally charged ideas that operate autonomously, pulling you into patterns of behavior that serve their need rather than your growth. There is a peculiar form of addiction at work here, and it operates on both sides of the relationship. The emotional vampire becomes addicted to the rush of borrowed vitality, while you become addicted to the feeling of being needed, of being the one person who can save them from their endless spiral of emotional chaos. This creates a form of psychological codependency that masquerades as deep connection. The unconscious wisdom of the psyche recognizes this dynamic, even when the conscious mind does not. You begin to feel drained after interactions with them, as if something vital has been extracted from your being. You may notice that conversations with them leave you feeling depleted rather than enriched, confused rather than clarified. Your dreams may begin to feature images of wells running dry, of gardens withering, of lights growing dim. Yet the emotional vampire is not merely a parasite in the traditional sense. They serve a profound function in the economy of the unconscious. Through their presence in our lives, we are forced to confront our own relationship with emotional energy. We must examine our need to be needed, our tendency to lose ourselves in others' dramas, our unconscious belief that love requires sacrifice of the self. The shadow aspect of the empath is revealed through this encounter. We discover that our compassion can become a trap, our empathy a form of emotional masochism. We realize that in our desire to heal others, we may be avoiding the difficult work of our own inner development. The emotional vampire becomes a mirror, reflecting back to us our own capacity for emotional cannibalism, the ways in which we too might feed on others' energy when we are disconnected from our own source. This is where the ancient wisdom of boundaries becomes not just practical advice, but a spiritual practice. Learning to say no to the emotional vampire is learning to say yes to your own authentic being. It is the recognition that true compassion sometimes requires the courage to allow others to face their own emptiness rather than constantly filling it with our presence. The process of establishing boundaries with an emotional vampire is like learning to become a lighthouse rather than a rescue ship. A lighthouse stands firm, offering its light to those who need guidance, but it does not abandon its foundation to chase after every vessel in distress. It trusts that its steady presence is gift enough, that its consistent beam is more valuable than any dramatic rescue mission. But here we encounter the enantiodromia, the reversal of opposites that Jung identified as a fundamental principle of the psyche. As we learn to protect ourselves from the emotional vampire, we must be careful not to swing too far in the opposite direction, becoming so defended that we lose our capacity for genuine empathy. The goal is not to become emotionally unavailable, but to develop what we might call conscious compassion, empathy that is rooted in strength rather than weakness, in choice rather than compulsion. The emotional vampire teaches us about the difference between sympathy and empathy, between feeling for someone and feeling with them. Sympathy can become a form of emotional imprisonment, where we take on others' feelings as our own. Empathy, properly understood, is the ability to recognize and understand another's emotional state without losing ourselves in it. It is compassion with boundaries. love with wisdom. There is a strange gift hidden within this dark encounter. The emotional vampire forces us to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing energies in consciousness without being torn apart by them. We must learn to be both compassionate and protective, both open and boundaried, both loving and discerning. This is the psychological equivalent of walking on water, maintaining our balance while navigating the turbulent waters of human emotional complexity. The mythology of the vampire has always carried this deeper psychological truth. The vampire is not merely a monster, but a representation of the unlived life, the part of us that exists in a state of perpetual hunger, because it has been cut off from the source of genuine nourishment. In folklore, vampires cannot cross running. Water cannot enter a home uninvited, cannot tolerate the light of the sun. These are not arbitrary rules, but symbolic representations of the psychological boundaries that can protect us from this form of emotional predation. Running water represents the flow of life energy, the natural current of authentic emotion. The emotional vampire cannot cross this because they have lost connection to their own emotional flow. The need for invitation represents the importance of conscious choice in our relationships. No one can drain our energy without our unconscious permission. The intolerance of sunlight represents their inability to exist in the clear light of consciousness, their need for the twilight realm of emotional confusion and drama. As we learn to recognize these patterns, we begin to see the emotional vampire, not as a villain in our story, but as a teacher who has arrived to help us develop greater emotional intelligence and spiritual discernment. They show us where we are leaking energy, where our boundaries are porous, where our compassion has become unconscious and therefore potentially harmful. The healing of this dynamic requires what Jung called active imagination, the ability to consciously engage with the unconscious contents of the psyche. We must imaginatively enter into relationship with our own inner emotional vampire, recognizing the ways in which we too might be seeking to sustain ourselves through borrowed vitality rather than developing our own authentic emotional resources. This inner work reveals that the emotional vampire archetype exists within us all. There are times when we too become dependent on others' energy, when we create drama to feel alive, when we manipulate situations to ensure we remain the center of attention. The external emotional vampire is often a projection of this inner dynamic, appearing in our lives to help us recognize and integrate this shadow aspect of ourselves. The ultimate healing comes not through rejection or condemnation, but through the development of what we might call emotional sovereignty, the ability to generate our own emotional vitality without dependence on others. This is not a turning away from relationship, but a turning toward authentic relationship based on mutual enrichment rather than energetic extraction. In the end, the emotional vampire serves as a guardian of a threshold, challenging us to develop the strength and wisdom necessary to engage in conscious relationship. They force us to answer the fundamental question: are we willing to love from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, to give from abundance rather than depletion, to connect through strength rather than weakness? This is the sacred lesson, hidden within the shadow of borrowed vitality. True nourishment comes not from feeding on others' light, but from learning to kindle the eternal flame that burns within our own hearts. The emotional vampire, in their desperate hunger, reminds us of what we must never forget, that we are each responsible for tending our own inner fire, for generating our own authentic emotional experience, for becoming the source of love rather than merely its recipient. Through this understanding, we transform from potential prey into conscious participants in the great dance of human relationship, learning to offer our gifts without losing ourselves, to receive others' offerings without becoming dependent, and to love with the wisdom that comes from knowing the difference between connection and consumption. In the deepest chambers of the psyche, where light bends and reality becomes negotiable, there exists a figure of tragic magnificence. The grandiose narcissist, forever trapped in the ancient myth of their own reflection. Like Narcissus by the pool's edge, they have fallen in love with an image that can never love them back, creating a psychological labyrinth where every mirror shows only their own face, and every relationship becomes a stage for the endless performance of their imagined greatness. Here dwells the fallen god, the dethroned monarch of their own making, ruling over a kingdom constructed entirely of psychological mirages. They move through the world with the bearing of royalty, demanding recognition for achievements that exist primarily in the realm of fantasy, seeking worship for a divinity they have never possessed. Yet, beneath this grand facade lies a wound, so profound that it has created its own gravitational field, pulling everything and everyone into the orbit of their bottomless need. The grandiose narcissist represents one of the most complex shadows in the human psyche, the inflation of the ego that occurs when the authentic self has been so thoroughly rejected that only a fantasy self remains. Jung understood this phenomenon as a form of possession, where the individual becomes identified with an archetypal image rather than their own human reality. They are not merely arrogant, they are psychologically lost, wandering in a desert of their own construction, mistaking mirages for oases. Watch how they enter your world, these architects of their own mythology. They arrive not with humility or genuine curiosity about others, but with an unconscious radar scanning for potential sources of narcissistic supply, those who will reflect back to them the grandiose image they desperately need to maintain. They seek not relationship but mirrors, not love but admiration, not connection but confirmation of their specialness. The tragedy begins in the wounds of early development, where the natural grandiosity of childhood, that beautiful phase where every child believes themselves the center of the universe, was either crushed or pathologically encouraged. Perhaps they were told they were special when they were merely being human, creating an addictive dependence on external validation. Or perhaps they were so wounded by neglect or abuse that grandiosity became their psychic armor, a defense against the intolerable truth of their vulnerability. In either case, the authentic self, that quiet, imperfect, beautifully human core of being, was rejected in favor of a false self of impossible proportions. The grandiose narcissist becomes like an actor who has forgotten they are performing, living entirely within the confines of a role that demands constant maintenance and validation from an audience that can never applaud loudly enough. The mythological resonance here is profound. Like the Greek gods who demanded sacrifice and worship to maintain their immortality, the grandiose narcissist requires a constant stream of attention and admiration to sustain their psychological survival. But unlike the gods of old, who possessed actual power, the grandiose narcissist rules only over the territory of their own delusion, a kingdom that exists nowhere but in their own mind and in the reflections they can manipulate in others. Their grandiosity operates like a black hole in the psychological realm, an object so dense with need that it warps the space around it, pulling everything into its gravitational field. Conversations become monologues about their achievements. Problems become opportunities to demonstrate their superior understanding. Other people's successes become either threats to be minimized or accomplishments to be claimed as somehow related to their influence. The grandiose narcissist has lost the capacity for what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in consciousness. They cannot be both great and ordinary, both successful and flawed, both admirable and human. Instead, they split the world into two categories: the superior, themselves, and the inferior, everyone else. This psychological splitting creates a prison where genuine relationship becomes impossible. For relationship requires the capacity to see others as separate beings worthy of consideration in their own right. But here we must pause and recognize the profound suffering hidden beneath this grandiose mask. The grandiose narcissist is not evil, but wounded, not malicious, but desperate. They are like a person dying of thirst who has convinced themselves they are drowning, pushing away the very water they need because they cannot tolerate the vulnerability of admitting their need. The unconscious knows the truth that the conscious mind cannot bear. Deep beneath the grandiose persona lies a wounded child who was never allowed to be imperfect, never permitted to fail, never given the safety to be simply human. This child lives in a state of perpetual terror. Terror that they will be discovered as ordinary, terror that their flaws will be exposed, terror that without their mask of specialness, they will cease to exist entirely. The enantiodromia at work here is particularly cruel. The more desperately they seek to prove their superiority, the more they reveal their deep sense of inferiority. The louder they proclaim their achievements, the more obvious becomes their inner emptiness. The more they demand admiration, the less admirable they become. They are trapped in a psychological Chinese finger trap. The harder they struggle to escape their insecurity, the more tightly it binds them. For those who encounter the grandiose narcissist, the experience can be bewildering and draining. Initially, there may be something compelling about their confidence, their apparent success, their willingness to take center stage. They often possess genuine talents and abilities, for they have spent their lives developing skills that will earn them the admiration they crave. But slowly, the one-sided nature of the relationship becomes apparent. The grandiose narcissist cannot truly see you as a separate person with your own needs, dreams, and reality. You exist in their psychological world only as a function, a mirror, to reflect their greatness, an audience to applaud their performance, a supporting character in the drama of their magnificence. Your own struggles become inconvenient interruptions to their narrative. Your successes become threats to their supremacy or opportunities for them to claim vicarious credit. They possess an uncanny ability to make everything about themselves, even when attempting to show concern for others. If you share good news, they will quickly redirect the conversation to their own superior achievements. If you share difficulties, they will either minimize your problems by comparing them to their greater struggles, or they will offer advice that positions them as your wise savior. The shadow gift they bring is the mirror they hold up to our own relationship with grandiosity and specialness. For within each of us lies the potential for narcissistic inflation, the temptation to solve our own feelings of inadequacy through the construction of a superior false self. The grandiose narcissist shows us what happens when this tendency goes unchecked, when the ego becomes so identified with an archetypal image that the human self disappears entirely. They challenge us to examine our own need for admiration, our own investment in being special, our own tendency to use others as mirrors for our self-worth. Through their presence, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable question: in what ways do we too demand that others reflect back to us the image we want to see of ourselves? The healing encounter with the grandiose narcissist is not about fixing them, for they rarely believe they need fixing, but about developing our own psychological immunity to their gravitational pull. This requires what Jung called the development of the authentic personality, the courage to be ordinary, imperfect, and genuinely human, rather than grandiose and false. We must learn to see through their performance without becoming cruel, to recognize their pain without becoming their audience, to maintain our own center, while refusing to be pulled into the orbit of their neediness. This is perhaps one of the most challenging psychological tasks, for it requires us to hold compassion for their suffering, while refusing to enable their delusion. The mythological wisdom contained in the story of Narcissus is profound. Narcissus did not die from self-love, but from the inability to truly love himself. He fell in love with an image, a reflection that could never satisfy his longing for genuine connection. The grandiose narcissist makes the same tragic error, seeking in others' admiration what they can only find through honest self-acceptance. The pool in which Narcissus saw his reflection becomes, in the psychological realm, the eyes of others. The grandiose narcissist spends their life searching for the perfect mirror, the person who will reflect back their grandiose image without distortion. But like Narcissus, they are doomed to disappointment, for no external reflection can heal the wound of self-rejection that lies at the core of their being. Their grandiosity serves as a kind of psychological anesthesia, numbing them to the pain of their authentic feelings, while simultaneously creating more pain through their isolation and emptiness. They become addicted to this anesthesia, requiring ever-increasing doses of admiration and validation to maintain their numbness. Yet the pain they are trying to avoid, the pain of being imperfectly human, is the very pain that could lead them to healing if they could find the courage to face it. The individuation process, Jung's term for the journey toward wholeness, requires the integration of opposites, including the integration of our grandiose fantasies with our human limitations. The grandiose narcissist represents what happens when this integration fails, when one pole of the opposition becomes so dominant that the other disappears entirely. In the symbolic language of alchemy, the grandiose narcissist is gold that has not been properly purified, containing too much dross, too much inflation. True gold, authentic self-worth, is achieved through the difficult process of burning away the false elements, facing the base material of our human imperfection, and emerging with something genuine rather than flashy. The encounter with the grandiose narcissist often serves as an initiation into deeper psychological wisdom. They teach us about the difference between confidence and grandiosity, between healthy self-regard and pathological self-inflation, between genuine achievement and performative success. Through their shadow, we learn to value authenticity over image, substance over style, genuine connection over admiration. Perhaps most importantly, they show us the tragic consequences of rejecting our own humanity in favor of an impossible ideal. They are a cautionary tale written in the language of psychology, demonstrating that the attempt to transcend human limitation through grandiose fantasy leads not to godhood, but to a peculiar form of psychological death, the death of the authentic self. The healing of this archetypal wound, whether in ourselves or in our response to others, requires what we might call sacred ordinariness, the recognition that our humanity, with all its flaws and limitations, is not something to be transcended, but something to be embraced. It is the understanding that we are most beautiful not when we are pretending to be gods, but when we are courageously being human. In the end, the grandiose narcissist stands as a mirror not of our greatness, but of our potential for self-deception. They remind us that true strength lies not in the inflation of the ego, but in the integration of the personality, not in the demand for worship, but in the capacity for genuine love, not in the construction of grandiose fantasies, but in the humble acceptance of our imperfect, magnificent, beautifully human reality. From the primordial depths where order has not yet conquered the wild waters of becoming, there rises a figure both terrifying and strangely necessary, the chaos maker, the shadow twin of the sacred trickster, the architect of psychological storms who mistakes destruction for creation and upheaval for transformation. They move through the world like a walking tempest, leaving in their wake not the fertile ground of authentic change, but the scattered debris of relationships, projects, and dreams that could not withstand the hurricane force of their unintegrated wildness. Here dwells the eternal child of the storm gods, forever intoxicated by the power to shatter what others have carefully built, mistaking their capacity for destruction as evidence of their creative potency. They are the ones who have forgotten that true transformation requires not just the breaking down of old forms, but the patient work of allowing something new and meaningful to emerge from the ruins. Instead, they have become addicted to the rush of demolition, the adrenaline of crisis, the strange comfort found in perpetual motion that never leads anywhere but back to more chaos. The Chaos Maker represents one of the most misunderstood shadows in the constellation of difficult personalities, for they often possess genuine gifts: creativity, spontaneity, the ability to see beyond conventional limitations. Yet these gifts have become corrupted by an unconscious identification with the destructive aspect of the creative force, like a river that has lost its banks and now floods everything in its path, rather than nourishing the landscape it flows through. Jung understood this archetype as a manifestation of the Ouroboros in its most primitive form, the serpent that devours its own tail, not in the service of renewal, but in an endless cycle of consumption that leads nowhere. The Chaos Maker has become trapped in what we might call the shadow side of the creative process, forever initiating but never completing, forever beginning but never finishing, forever stirring the pot but never allowing the soup to cook. Watch how they enter your world, these merchants of perpetual upheaval. They arrive with a kind of magnetic energy that can be initially exciting, bringing with them the promise of adventure, spontaneity, and escape from the mundane routines of ordinary life. There is something intoxicating about their disregard for conventional boundaries, their willingness to challenge authority, their apparent freedom from the constraints that bind more conventional souls. But slowly, you begin to notice the pattern. Every project they touch remains unfinished. Every relationship they enter becomes a battlefield. Every stable situation they encounter becomes an opportunity for disruption. They are like psychological arsonists, setting fires not because they hate what burns, but because they are addicted to the light and heat of the flames. The tragedy of the Chaos Maker lies in their fundamental misunderstanding of the creative process. They have identified creativity with chaos alone, forgetting that genuine creation requires both the dissolving power of chaos and the structuring power of order. They are like a musician who knows only how to tune the instruments but never learns to play a song, or an artist who can only mix colors but never creates a painting. Their addiction to chaos serves multiple unconscious functions. First, it provides a constant source of stimulation that masks deeper feelings of emptiness or depression. The drama and crisis create a kind of psychological cocaine, keeping them in a perpetual state of heightened arousal that prevents them from having to face the quiet spaces where authentic feeling and genuine self-reflection might occur. Second, chaos serves as a defense against intimacy and commitment. By constantly creating upheaval, they ensure that no relationship can develop the depth and stability that would require them to be truly seen and known. They remain forever elusive, forever in motion, forever escaping the terrifying vulnerability of genuine human connection. Third, the creation of chaos gives them a sense of power and control, even if it is the power to destroy rather than create. In a world where they may feel powerless in many areas of their life, their ability to disrupt and destabilize gives them a feeling of agency, however destructive it may be. The unconscious wisdom contained in this archetype relates to the ancient, understanding that chaos is indeed a necessary part of the creative process. In mythology, chaos is not evil, but primordial, the fertile void from which all things emerge. The Norse had Ginnungagap, the Greeks had their primordial chaos, and many creation myths begin with a formless void that must be stirred into creative motion. But the Chaos Maker has become trapped in this primordial state, unable or unwilling to allow the natural progression from chaos to cosmos, from dissolution to creation. They are like someone forever stirring cake batter without ever putting it in the oven, believing that the stirring itself is the point, rather than understanding it as preparation for something greater. Their presence in our lives serves as a powerful initiatory force, though not in the way they intend. The Chaos Maker forces us to develop what Jung might have called psychological sea legs, the ability to maintain our balance and center, even when the ground beneath us is constantly shifting. They teach us the difference between flexibility and instability, between openness to change and addiction to upheaval. Through their disruptive presence, we are challenged to develop what the mystics call the unmoved mover, that stable center within ourselves that can remain calm in the midst of external storm. We learn to distinguish between changes that serve growth and changes that serve only the compulsion to change. We develop the capacity to remain grounded even when others around us are spinning in psychological tornadoes. The shadow gift of the chaos maker is their ability to reveal our own hidden attachments to stability and control. They show us where we have become too rigid, too invested in maintaining the status quo, too fearful of the unknown. Their presence can shake us out of complacency and force us to examine whether our stability comes from genuine strength or from fear of change. But they also reveal the shadow of our own relationship with chaos. We may discover our own tendency to create drama when life becomes too peaceful, our own attraction to crisis as a form of excitement, our own ways of sabotaging stability when it becomes too threatening to our sense of identity. The chaos maker becomes a mirror for our own unintegrated relationship with the creative destructive force. The enantiodromia at work here is particularly instructive. The chaos maker, in their desperate attempt to avoid stagnation, creates a different kind of stagnation, the stagnation of perpetual motion that goes nowhere. In running from the death they fear in stillness, they create a kind of living death where nothing can grow to maturity, nothing can develop depth, nothing can reach completion. They are like psychological Peter Pans, forever avoiding the adult responsibility of seeing things through to completion, forever fleeing the necessary deaths that allow for genuine rebirth. Their chaos becomes not the fertile chaos of creation, but the sterile chaos of endless repetition, the same destructive patterns played out again and again without learning or growth. The mythological resonance here connects to trickster figures across cultures, Loki, Coyote, Hermes in his darker aspects. But where the traditional trickster serves a necessary function in the cosmic order, bringing change that ultimately serves growth and evolution, the chaos maker has become trapped in the trickster's shadow, using their disruptive power not in service of transformation, but in service of their own unconscious needs. They remind us of the alchemical principle that dissolution must be followed by coagulation, that breaking down must be followed by building up, that the solve must be balanced by the coagula. The chaos maker has mastered the solve, the art of dissolution, but has never learned the coagula, the art of bringing things together in new and meaningful ways. For those who must navigate relationship with a chaos maker, the challenge is to develop what we might call conscious stability, the ability to remain centered not through rigidity, but through flexibility, not through control, but through acceptance, not through resistance, but through the cultivation of an inner calm that cannot be disturbed by external turbulence. This requires learning to see their chaos as their own responsibility rather than our emergency. We must resist the unconscious pull to either join them in their whirlwind or to frantically try to clean up the messes they create. Instead, we learn to maintain our own boundaries while allowing them to experience the consequences of their choices. The chaos maker teaches us about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them, between love and codependency, between helping and rescuing. They show us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to step back and allow the natural consequences of chaos to teach its own lessons. They also challenge us to examine our own relationship with order and structure. Are we too rigid, too controlling, too invested in keeping things the same? Their presence, however disruptive, can serve as a medicine for those of us who have become too comfortable with the known, too afraid of change, too attached to our carefully constructed worlds. The healing of this archetype, whether in ourselves or in our response to others, requires what we might call conscious creativity. The understanding that true creative power comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to transform, not from the capacity to create chaos, but from the wisdom to work with chaos, as raw material for something beautiful and meaningful. This healing involves learning to embrace what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between order and chaos, structure and spontaneity, stability and change. It requires developing the patience to see things through to completion while maintaining the flexibility to adapt when circumstances require it. The chaos maker ultimately serves as a teacher of boundaries and discernment. They show us the importance of choosing our battles, of protecting our energy, of distinguishing between changes that serve growth and changes that serve only compulsion. They teach us that true strength is not the ability to withstand any storm, but the wisdom to know which storms are worth weathering and which ones we must simply let pass. In the economy of the unconscious, the chaos maker serves as a kind of psychological immune system challenge, forcing us to develop stronger boundaries, clearer discernment, and deeper rootedness in our own truth. They are the sandpaper that polishes our ability to remain centered, the resistance that strengthens our psychological muscles, the test that proves the authenticity of our inner stability. Perhaps most profoundly, they remind us that chaos and order are not enemies but dance partners in the great choreography of existence. The question is not whether we will encounter chaos, for chaos is an inevitable part of life, but whether we will learn to dance with it consciously, using its energy for transformation rather than destruction, for creation rather than mere excitement, for genuine growth rather than endless motion that leads nowhere but back to itself. Through this understanding, we transform our relationship with the chaos maker from victim to witness, from reactive participant to conscious observer, learning to appreciate the wild energy they represent, while refusing to be swept away by the storm of their unintegrated creativity. In the hidden choreography of human destiny, there exists a profound mystery that most of us spend our lives trying to understand. Why do we attract into our lives the very people who seem designed to wound us most deeply? Why do we find ourselves drawn to those who will challenge our deepest vulnerabilities, trigger our oldest wounds, and force us to confront the very aspects of ourselves we have spent years trying to avoid? This is the riddle of the sacred wound, the understanding that our greatest tormentors are often our most profound teachers, arriving not as accidents, but as sacred appointments with our own unlived potential. Jung understood this phenomenon as part of the unconscious wisdom of the psyche, an intelligence that operates beneath the level of conscious awareness to bring us exactly what we need for our psychological and spiritual development, even when, especially when, it appears to be the opposite of what we want. The difficult people who enter our lives are not random encounters but carefully orchestrated meetings with aspects of our own shadow that we have not yet integrated. Mirrors reflecting back the parts of ourselves we have disowned, denied, or never claimed. Consider the strange magnetism that draws us towards certain individuals, often against our better judgment. There is something that feels like recognition in these encounters, though we may not understand what it is we are recognizing. It is as if some deep part of our psyche reaches out across the space between us and says, "Yes, this one will show me something I need to see about myself." The conscious mind may recoil, sensing danger, but the unconscious mind leans forward, recognizing opportunity disguised as threat. This is the profound wisdom hidden within what appears to be psychological masochism, the tendency to repeat patterns that seem to harm us. We are not actually drawn to pain for its own sake, but to the growth that lies on the other side of pain, to the strength that can only be developed through resistance, to the self-knowledge that can only be earned through confronting what we would rather avoid. Like iron sharpening iron, these difficult encounters serve the greater purpose of individuation, forcing us to develop psychological muscles we never knew we possessed. The sacred wound operates through what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that suggest an underlying order to existence that transcends simple cause and effect. The person who shows up in our life at just the moment when we need to learn about boundaries is not there by accident. The individual who triggers our deepest insecurities appears precisely when our soul is ready to heal those wounds, even if our ego is not. The one who challenges our carefully constructed persona arrives when it is time for that false self to die so that a more authentic self can be born. But why must this learning come through pain? Why must our teachers so often appear as our tormentors? The answer lies in the nature of psychological defense itself. We build our defenses around our wounds not to heal them, but to avoid feeling them. These defenses become so automatic, so unconscious, that only a significant disruption can reveal them to us. The difficult person in our life serves as that disruption, pressing against our defenses until we are forced to see them clearly, to understand their function, and ultimately to choose whether to maintain them or let them go. The alchemical tradition understood this principle as the necessity of the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul that must precede any genuine transformation. The lead of our unconscious patterns must be subjected to intense heat and pressure before it can be transformed into the gold of conscious awareness. Our destroyers are the fire that makes this transformation possible, applying exactly the pressure needed to crack open the shell of our false self and reveal the authentic self that lies beneath. This is why we often find ourselves repeating the same relationship patterns, attracting variations of the same type of person again and again. Each repetition is an opportunity to finally learn what we need to learn, to develop what we need to develop, to integrate what we need to integrate. The pattern will continue until we have extracted its teaching, until we have developed the strength or wisdom or compassion that the pattern was designed to cultivate. The sacred wound also operates through the principle of complementarity. We attract those who carry the qualities we have disowned in ourselves. If we have denied our own anger, we will attract those who are chronically angry. If we have rejected our own neediness, we will draw those who are excessively needy. If we have suppressed our own power, we will magnetize those who abuse power. Through their exaggerated expression of these qualities, we are forced to confront our own relationship with them. This is not to suggest that we somehow deserve abuse or that all relationships are meant to be difficult. The sacred wound is not an excuse for staying in harmful situations or tolerating unacceptable behavior. Rather, it is an understanding that can help us extract meaning from difficulty, wisdom from pain, and growth from what might otherwise be simply traumatic experience. The key lies in learning to distinguish between sacred wounds and simple trauma, between relationships that are difficult because they are serving our growth and relationships that are harmful because they are serving someone else's unconscious pathology. The sacred wound has a quality of mutuality to it. Both parties are learning and growing, even if the learning is painful. Simple trauma, on the other hand, is one-sided, serving only the needs of the one inflicting it. The sacred wound also has a quality of temporality to it. It serves its purpose and then naturally resolves, either through the healing of the dynamic or through the completion of the relationship. It does not go on indefinitely unless we are refusing to learn what it has come to teach us. When we finally understand and integrate the lesson, the need for that particular teacher naturally ends. This understanding transforms our relationship with difficult people from one of victimhood to one of curious engagement. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we begin to ask, "What is this here to teach me?" Instead of seeing ourselves as passive recipients of other people's unconscious behavior, we begin to see ourselves as active participants in a complex dance of mutual, unconscious healing. The shadow figures who wound us are often carrying aspects of ourselves that we have been unable or unwilling to face. The person who betrays us may be showing us our own capacity for betrayal. The one who abandons us may be reflecting our own tendency to abandon ourselves. The individual who criticizes us harshly may be voicing the inner critic we have been trying to silence. By externalizing these aspects through other people, the psyche creates an opportunity for us to see them clearly and work with them consciously. This is the profound paradox of the sacred wound. Our enemies are often our greatest allies, our destroyers are frequently our most important teachers, and our most painful relationships may be our most transformative ones. This does not mean we should seek out pain or remain in harmful situations, but rather that we can learn to work with the pain that comes to us naturally, extracting its wisdom and allowing it to serve our growth. The process of recognizing and working with the sacred wound requires what Jung called active imagination, the ability to engage consciously with the unconscious contents that are being activated in the relationship. We must learn to see beyond the surface drama to the deeper psychological process that is taking place. We must develop the capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, seeing the other person as both difficult and meaningful, seeing ourselves as both wounded and growing, seeing the relationship as both painful and sacred. This work is not easy, for it requires us to take responsibility not for what others do to us, but for what we do with what others do to us. It asks us to find meaning in meaninglessness, purpose in pain, and growth in the very experiences that seem designed to diminish us. It requires us to develop what the mystics call the witness consciousness, the part of us that can observe our own psychological processes without being completely identified with them. The enantiodromia at work in the sacred wound is particularly powerful. The very people who seem to be our enemies often become our greatest teachers. The relationships that cause us the most pain often become the source of our greatest growth. The experiences that seem to be breaking us down are often breaking us open to new possibilities we could never have imagined. But this transformation is not automatic. It requires our conscious participation, our willingness to look for the gift, hidden within the curse, the medicine concealed within the poison. We must learn to approach our difficult relationships not just with boundaries and self-protection, though these are necessary, but also with curiosity and gratitude for the learning they provide. The sacred wound teaches us that we are not random victims of other people's unconscious behavior, but conscious participants in a great web of interconnected healing. Every person who wounds us is also being wounded by us in some way, for we too are serving as their unconscious teacher, their sacred wound, their opportunity for growth and integration. This understanding brings with it a profound sense of responsibility. If we are all unconsciously teaching each other, if we are all serving as mirrors for each other's unlived potential, then we must ask ourselves, what am I teaching? What wounds am I inflicting? What aspects of my own shadow am I projecting onto others? How can I serve the healing of others while still honoring my own need for healing? The sacred wound reveals that healing is not a solitary process, but a collective one. We heal together or not at all, for our wounds are interconnected, our shadows are entangled, our growth is interdependent. The person who triggers our deepest wound is also the person who can witness our deepest healing if we have the courage to stay present to the process rather than fleeing from its intensity. In the end, the sacred wound teaches us that love and pain, growth and suffering, healing and wounding are not opposites but complementary aspects of the same process. The great work of individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, requires us to embrace both the light and the shadow, both the gift and the curse, both the medicine and the poison. Through this embrace, we discover that our destroyers have been our saviors all along, that our greatest enemies have been our most devoted teachers, and that the very experiences we thought would break us have actually been breaking us open to a deeper, more authentic, more complete version of ourselves. This is the mystery of the sacred wound, that in the heart of our deepest pain lies the seed of our greatest transformation. In the mysterious alchemy of human relationship, there exists a phenomenon so profound, yet so commonly overlooked that it shapes the very fabric of our interactions without our conscious awareness. This is the mirror of projection, the unconscious process by which we cast the disowned aspects of our own psyche onto others, seeing in them what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. Like ancient alchemists who sought to transform base metals into gold, we must learn to recognize and reclaim the precious material we have unknowingly deposited in the souls of others. The 6 archetypal figures we have encountered, the victim, the rescuer, the persecutor, the emotional vampire, the grandiose narcissist, and the chaos maker. These are not merely external characters who wander into our lives from some distant psychological landscape. They are, in the deepest sense, aspects of our own unlived potential, fragments of our own psyche that we have split off and projected outward because they were too threatening, too overwhelming, or too contradictory to our conscious self-image to integrate. This is perhaps the most humbling discovery in the journey of individuation, that our strongest reactions to others often reveal more about us than about them. The very qualities we find most disturbing, most intolerable, most worthy of condemnation in others are precisely the qualities that exist as seeds within our own unconscious, waiting for the right conditions to sprout into consciousness. We are, in essence, surrounded by mirrors that reflect back to us the disowned gold of our own being. Consider the violent reaction you might have to someone you perceive as pathetically weak, constantly playing the victim. This reaction, charged with contempt and frustration, points to something profound within your own psyche. Perhaps there lives within you a part that feels victimized, powerless, overwhelmed by circumstances, a part you have buried so deeply that you can only encounter it through the external figure of the victim. Your anger at their weakness may be anger at your own disowned vulnerability. Your contempt for their helplessness may be contempt for your own hidden feelings of powerlessness. The psychological mechanism at work here is what Jung called the shadow. Those aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, or never developed. The shadow is not evil in itself, but it becomes problematic when it remains unconscious and unintegrated. When we refuse to acknowledge certain qualities within ourselves, the psyche finds ways to bring them to our attention through the external world. We literally attract people who will embody these qualities in exaggerated form, forcing us to confront what we have tried to avoid. The rescuer archetype provides another illuminating example. If you find yourself repeatedly drawn to people who need saving, who require your help to function in the world, you might ask yourself, what is it within me that needs rescuing? What part of my own psyche have I abandoned, neglected, or left to die? The compulsive need to rescue others often masks a desperate need to be rescued ourselves, a need we cannot acknowledge directly because it contradicts our self-image as strong, capable, and independent. The projection of the rescuer allows us to care for others in ways we cannot care for ourselves, to offer compassion to others that we cannot offer to our own wounded parts. But this external caring becomes a substitute for the internal caring we desperately need, creating a cycle where we remain perpetually busy with others' needs, while our own needs remain unmet, unacknowledged, and unhealed. The persecutor archetype reveals perhaps the most uncomfortable truth about projection. If you find yourself repeatedly encountering people who seem aggressive, critical, or hostile, you must ask yourself, where is my own aggression? Where is my own capacity for cruelty, my own inner critic, my own shadow persecutor? Often, those who have been taught that anger is unacceptable, that aggression is evil, that any form of assertiveness is wrong, will project their own natural aggressive instincts onto others. The result is a psychological split where they become the perpetual victim of others' aggression while remaining unconscious of their own capacity for harm. They may pride themselves on being peaceful, gentle, non-confrontational, while unconsciously provoking aggressive responses in others through passive-aggressive behavior, martyrdom, or subtle forms of emotional manipulation. The external persecutor becomes a repository for all the anger and aggression they cannot acknowledge in themselves. The emotional vampire presents us with a particularly challenging mirror. If you find yourself repeatedly drained by people who seem to feed on your emotional energy, you must examine your own relationship with emotional nourishment. Are there ways in which you too feed on others' emotions? Are there times when you create drama to feel alive, when you seek attention through crisis, when you use others' empathy to avoid developing your own emotional resources? The compulsive need to be the strong one, the one who gives but never receives, may mask a deep hunger for emotional connection that you cannot acknowledge directly. The emotional vampire forces you to confront your own emotional needs, your own capacity for dependency, your own ways of seeking validation and attention from others. The Grandiose Narcissist offers perhaps the most painful mirror of all, for they reflect back to us our own relationship with specialness, superiority, and the inflation of the ego. If you find yourself repeatedly encountering people who seem arrogant, self-centered, or grandiose, you must ask yourself, where is my own grandiosity? Where do I secretly believe I am special, superior, more enlightened than others? Often, those who have the strongest reactions to narcissistic behavior are those who have developed what we might call covert narcissism, a secret belief in their own specialness that they cannot acknowledge directly. They may pride themselves on their humility while secretly feeling superior to those who are obviously grandiose. They may condemn others' arrogance while harboring their own subtle forms of self-importance. The chaos maker forces us to confront our own relationship with stability and change, order and disorder. If you find yourself repeatedly encountering people who create chaos and disruption, you must examine your own shadow relationship with these forces. Are there ways in which you too create chaos when life becomes too predictable? Are there times when you sabotage stability because it feels threatening to your sense of identity? The compulsive need for control and order may mask a deep fear of your own chaotic impulses, your own capacity for destruction, your own shadow trickster who wants to upset the apple cart of conventional life. The external chaos maker becomes a repository for all the wildness and unpredictability you cannot acknowledge in yourself. This process of recognizing and withdrawing projections is what Jung called one of the most difficult and important tasks in the journey of individuation. It requires us to take back the energy we have invested in others and recognize it as our own. It asks us to see that our enemies are often our disowned selves, our tormentors are our unintegrated aspects, and our greatest irritations are our most precious opportunities for growth. The alchemical metaphor is particularly apt here. In medieval alchemy, the process of creating gold involved first recognizing that the base metal contained the essence of gold within it. The transformation was not about adding something foreign to the base metal, but about refining and purifying what was already there. Similarly, the process of withdrawing projections involves recognizing that the qualities we see in others are already within us, waiting to be refined and integrated. This recognition is often accompanied by a profound sense of humility. We realize that we are not the victims of others' unconscious behavior, but participants in a complex dance of mutual projection and unconscious healing. We see that our righteousness, our victimhood, our sense of superiority over others' flaws has been built on a foundation of psychological splitting and self-deception. But this humility, painful as it may be, is also liberating. When we stop projecting our disowned aspects onto others, We reclaim the energy that was bound up in those projections. We discover capacities within ourselves that we never knew existed. We develop a more complete, more authentic, more integrated sense of who we are. The victim within us, once acknowledged, can become a source of genuine compassion for others suffering. The rescuer within us can become a source of authentic service that doesn't deplete us because it comes from wholeness, rather than compensation. The persecutor within us can become a source of healthy boundaries and appropriate assertiveness. The emotional vampire within us can become a source of emotional authenticity and depth. The grandiose narcissist within us can become a source of genuine confidence and self-worth. The chaos maker within us can become a source of creative spontaneity and adaptive flexibility. This is the gold hidden within the base metal of our projections, the recognition that every shadow quality, once integrated, becomes a source of strength rather than weakness, of authenticity rather than compensation, of wholeness rather than splitting. The process of projection withdrawal is not a one-time event but an ongoing practice. We must develop what Jung called the observing ego, the part of us that can watch our own psychological processes without being completely identified with them. We must learn to notice when we are having strong reactions to others and ask ourselves, what is this telling me about myself? What am I seeing in them that I cannot see in myself? This practice requires great courage, for it asks us to give up the comfortable fiction that our problems are caused by others, that our difficulties are the result of external circumstances, that our suffering is the fault of those around us. It asks us to take responsibility not for what others do, but for our own psychological responses to what others do. The enantiodromia at work in projection is particularly powerful. The very people we most strongly reject often become our greatest teachers. The qualities we most vehemently condemn in others often become the qualities we most need to develop in ourselves. The external figures we most want to avoid often carry the very medicine our souls are seeking. But this transformation is not automatic. It requires our conscious participation, our willingness to look into the mirror of relationship and see ourselves reflected there. It requires us to develop what we might call projection consciousness, the ability to recognize when we are projecting and to work with those projections as opportunities for self-discovery rather than evidence of others' failings. As we learn to withdraw our projections, we discover that the external world becomes less threatening, less populated with enemies, and more populated with teachers. We begin to see that every person we encounter is, in some sense, a reflection of our own psyche, a carrier of some aspect of ourselves that we need to recognize and integrate. This does not mean that we become passive or fail to set appropriate boundaries. Rather, it means that we engage with others from a place of psychological awareness rather than unconscious reactivity. We learn to respond to others' behavior while simultaneously working with our own internal responses to that behavior. The ultimate goal of projection withdrawal is not to eliminate all projections, for some degree of projection is necessary for psychological functioning, but to make our projections conscious. When we can see clearly what we are projecting onto others, we can choose whether to continue that projection or to reclaim the energy invested in it. This conscious relationship with projection transforms our understanding of human relationship itself. We begin to see that we are all walking mirrors for each other, all carrying aspects of the collective human psyche that others need to see and integrate. Our relationships become not just personal exchanges, but opportunities for mutual psychological healing and growth. In the end, the mirror of projection reveals that the external world is not separate from the internal world, but intimately connected to it. Our outer circumstances reflect our inner circumstances, our external relationships mirror our internal relationships, and our encounters with others are always, in some sense, encounters with ourselves. Through this understanding, we transform from unconscious participants in the projection game to conscious collaborators in the work of mutual healing and integration. We learn to see ourselves and others with greater compassion, recognizing that we are all struggling with the same basic human task, the task of becoming whole, integrated, authentic human beings. This is the gold hidden within the base metal of our projections, the recognition that every difficult encounter is an opportunity for greater self-knowledge. Every challenging relationship is a chance for deeper integration, and every mirror we encounter in the world is ultimately reflecting back to us some aspect of our own infinite, complex, and beautiful human soul. You stand now at the threshold of the most sacred work, the alchemical transformation that turns the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom. Here, in this crucible of relationship and boundary, you encounter the ancient mystery that has captivated seekers for millennia. How does one remain open-hearted while protecting the tender flame of authentic selfhood? How does the soul learn to dance between vulnerability and discernment, between love and self-preservation? The alchemists of old understood something profound about transformation. They knew that gold was not created through force or violence, but through patient tending, through the careful application of heat and pressure, through the willingness to dissolve what no longer served in order to reveal what had always been precious within. Their laboratories were temples, their formulas prayers, their process a sacred dialogue between the known and unknown aspects of existence. You, too, are an alchemist now, standing before the great work of psychological transformation. The base metal of your wounded relationships, those encounters with shadow figures who have shown you the places where your boundaries have been too porous or too rigid, becomes the raw material for your opus. Each difficult interaction, each moment of feeling invaded or dismissed, each instance of losing yourself in another's drama or closing your heart in self-protection offers you the prima materia from which wisdom emerges. But this alchemy cannot be rushed, cannot be forced through willpower alone. It requires what the ancients called the solve et coagula, the dissolution and reconstitution that allows old patterns to release their grip so that new forms of being can crystallize. You must be willing to let the familiar structures of how you have related to others dissolve, to sit in the uncertainty of not knowing how to respond, to allow the fixed ideas about what you owe others or what they owe you to melt in the fires of deeper understanding. The philosopher's stone you seek is not some external technique or method, but the development of what might be called sacred discernment, the capacity to feel deeply into the truth of each moment and respond from a place of integrated wisdom rather than reactive pattern. This discernment arises not from the mind's analysis, but from the body's knowing, from the heart's intelligence, from the spirit's recognition of what serves life and what diminishes it. As you begin this work, you discover that boundaries are not what you once believed them to be. They are not walls built from fear, not barriers erected to keep the world at bay. True boundaries are more like the membrane of a living cell, permeable, intelligent, responsive to what needs to enter and what needs to be kept out. They breathe with the rhythm of your authentic needs, expanding when love approaches, contracting when harm threatens, always in service of the life force that moves through you. This understanding transforms everything about how you approach relationship. Where once you might have swung between extremes, either completely open and thus vulnerable to invasion, or completely closed and thus cut off from nourishment, you begin to develop a third way, a middle path that honors both your need for connection and your need for autonomy. You learn to say yes and no from the same deep place, to offer love without losing yourself, to receive care without abandoning your discernment. The shadow figures in your life become your teachers in this alchemical process. The person who consistently demands more than you can give shows you where you have confused love with self-sacrifice. The one who dismisses your needs reveals where you have not yet learned to value your own depths. The individual who projects their unresolved wounds onto you becomes a mirror in which you can see your own unconscious patterns of projection and reactivity. In the crucible of these challenging relationships, you begin to recognize the difference between empathy and emotional fusion, between compassion and codependence, between healthy accommodation and self-abandonment. You learn that you can feel another's pain without taking it on as your own, that you can offer support without becoming responsible for outcomes you cannot control, that you can love someone deeply while acknowledging that they may not be capable of the kind of relationship your soul requires. This discernment does not arise overnight. It emerges through countless small moments of choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, presence over reactivity, truth over the comfort of familiar patterns. Each time you pause before automatically saying yes to a request that feels wrong in your body, each time you speak your truth with kindness but firmness, each time you remain centered in your own experience while witnessing another's distress, you are adding heat to the alchemical vessel, encouraging the transformation from lead to gold. The heat of this process can be intense. There will be moments when every cell in your body wants to revert to old patterns, to please, to fix, to merge, to withdraw, to attack, to defend. The discomfort of remaining conscious in the face of unconscious pull can feel almost unbearable. This is when you must remember that the alchemical fire is not meant to destroy, but to purify, not to punish, but to reveal the gold that has always resided within the lead of your human experience. As the work deepens, you begin to notice subtle shifts in how you navigate relationship. Conversations that once left you drained now become opportunities for authentic exchange. Situations that previously triggered automatic responses now offer space for creative solutions. People who once seemed impossible to deal with reveal themselves to be wounded souls seeking the same love and understanding you are learning to give yourself. The gold that emerges from this process is not the false gold of people-pleasing or the fool's gold of rigid control, but the genuine gold of self-respect wed to compassion, of strength tempered by tenderness, of discernment informed by love. You discover that you can be both vulnerable and boundaried, both open and selective, both generous and self-preserving. These are not contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be lived, polarities to be held in creative tension. This alchemical work extends beyond your immediate relationships to touch every aspect of your engagement with the world. You begin to apply the same discernment to how you spend your time, where you direct your energy, what voices you allow into your inner sanctuary. You learn to distinguish between opportunities that align with your authentic path and distractions that seduce you away from your deeper purpose. You develop the capacity to engage with the world's pain without being overwhelmed by it, to contribute to healing without losing yourself in the wounds of others. The transformation is never complete, never final. Like the alchemist's great work, it is an ongoing process of refinement, a continuous spiral of dissolution and reconstitution. Each new challenge offers fresh opportunities to apply your growing wisdom, to deepen your capacity for discernment, to strengthen the flexible boundaries that allow you to remain both connected and autonomous. There will be times when you slip back into old patterns, when the gold seems to revert to lead, when the boundaries you thought you had established prove insufficient for new challenges. This is not failure, but part of the natural rhythm of transformation. The alchemical process includes periods of regression, moments when the work seems to be undoing itself, phases when the prima materia appears more chaotic than when you began. In these moments, remember that even apparent setbacks serve the greater work. Sometimes the gold must be dissolved again so that impurities can be removed, so that a purer form can emerge. Sometimes the boundaries must be tested so that you can discover where they need strengthening or where they have become too rigid. Sometimes you must lose your way briefly so that you can find it again more consciously, more deliberately, more authentically. The true gold of this alchemical process is not perfection, but integration, the capacity to hold all aspects of your humanity with compassion while maintaining clear discernment about what serves your highest good and what does not. It is the wisdom to know when to open and when to close, when to give and when to receive, when to engage and when to withdraw. It is the art of living as a whole person in relationship with other whole persons, each honoring the sovereignty of the other while celebrating the connections that weave you into the larger tapestry of existence. As you embody this gold, you become a different kind of presence in the world. People sense in you a quality of centeredness that does not depend on their approval or disapproval. They recognize a strength that is not rigid but flexible, a love that does not demand but simply is. Your very being becomes an invitation for others to discover their own capacity for authentic relationship, their own ability to transform the lead of their relational patterns into the gold of conscious connection. This is the gift of the alchemical work, not just personal transformation, but the transmission of possibility to all those whose lives you touch. In learning to honor your own boundaries while remaining open to love, you model a way of being that serves the evolution of human consciousness itself. You become living proof that it is possible to be both vulnerable and strong, both connected and autonomous, both loving and discerning. The philosopher's stone you have been seeking was never separate from you. It is the awakened consciousness that can transform any experience, no matter how leaden, into an opportunity for golden wisdom. It is the part of you that remains centered in love while navigating the complexities of human relationship. It is the eternal within you that can witness the dramas of personality while remaining untouched by their turbulence. Hold this gold gently, tenderly, as the precious substance it is. Let its light illuminate not only your own path, but the paths of all those who are ready to undertake their own alchemical work. Trust that in transforming the lead of your relational wounds into the gold of conscious love, you are participating in the great work of human healing, the collective transformation from unconscious reactivity to conscious response, from separation to integration, from lead to gold. You stand now at the threshold of the great mystery, the sacred death that births authentic life. Here, in the smouldering ruins of what you once believed yourself to be, the phoenix of your true nature prepares to rise. The shadow figures who have crossed your path, those difficult souls who have triggered your deepest wounds and exposed your most carefully guarded secrets, have served as unwitting midwives to your rebirth. They have been the flames that consumed your false identifications, the sacred fire that burned away everything that was not truly you. This is individuation, not the comfortable growth of adding new qualities to an existing self, but the radical transformation that occurs when the ego's cherished illusions are stripped away, leaving only the eternal essence that has always been your truest nature. It is the alchemical process Jung recognized as the soul's deepest calling, the movement from the collective unconscious toward the unique expression of your individual wholeness. Each encounter with these shadow bearers has been an initiation, a ritual death that prepares you for resurrection. When they dismissed your deepest truths, they forced you to discover what remains when external validation is withdrawn. When they projected their wounds onto you, they revealed the places where you had been unconsciously carrying the projections of others. When they demanded that you betray your authentic nature to maintain relationship, they offered you the ultimate gift, the opportunity to choose yourself, perhaps for the first time in your life. The pain of these encounters has been the labor pain of your own birth. Just as the physical birth requires the breaking of waters, the contraction of muscles, the passage through the narrow canal of transformation, your psychological birth has required the breaking of old patterns, the contraction of what seemed stable, the passage through the narrow places where only truth can survive. You have been both the mother and the child in this process, both the one who labors and the one who is born. In the beginning, you may have interpreted these difficult relationships as evidence of your failure, your unworthiness, your inability to love or be loved. The ego, terrified of its own dissolution, creates elaborate stories to explain why these encounters feel so threatening. It tells you that if only you were different, more patient, more understanding, more giving, these relationships would transform into the harmonious connections you long for. It does not yet understand that the very difficulty of these encounters is their gift, that the friction is the fire that burns away the false self. But as you move deeper into the individuation process, you begin to recognize these encounters as sacred appointments with your own becoming. Each person who has challenged you, frustrated you, or wounded you has been a teacher in disguise, pointing toward the aspects of yourself that were ready for transformation. The narcissist who could never truly see you revealed where you had been looking for yourself in the mirror of others' recognition. The critic who diminished your accomplishments showed you where you had been seeking worth through external achievement. The one who demanded your energy without reciprocation illuminated the places where you had been giving from emptiness rather than fullness. The fire of these encounters burns with different intensities at different stages of the journey. Sometimes it is the slow burn of chronic frustration, the steady heat that gradually transforms coal into diamond. Sometimes it is the sudden conflagration that consumes everything in its path, leaving you standing naked in the ashes of what you once believed about yourself and others. Both forms of fire serve the same purpose: the purification of consciousness, the separation of the essential from the superficial, the gold from the dross. As the false personas begin to fall away, you may experience what feels like a loss of identity. The masks you have worn, the good child, the responsible adult, the understanding friend, the selfless partner, have provided not only protection, but also a sense of who you are. Without them, you may feel exposed, uncertain, even terrified. Who are you, if not the roles you have played? What remains when the audience for your performance disappears? This is the dark night of the soul that precedes authentic selfhood. In this darkness, you must learn to trust what cannot be seen, to rely on what cannot be proven, to believe in what cannot be grasped by the rational mind. You must learn to sit with the uncomfortable truth that you are more than any role you have played, more than any story you have told about yourself, more than any identity you have constructed from the fragments of others' expectations. The phoenix that rises from these ashes is not the improved version of who you were before. It is an entirely different order of being, where once you sought to be loved, you now seek to love from the overflow of self-acceptance. Where once you feared rejection, you now understand that those who cannot see your true nature are simply not your people. Where once you tried to fix or change others, you now hold space for their own journey, while remaining firmly rooted in your own. This transformation is not achieved through effort or willpower, but through surrender. The willingness to let the fire do its work, to trust the process even when it seems destructive, to allow the old self to die so that the new self can be born. It requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposing forces without collapsing into either extreme, to remain conscious in the face of unconscious pull, to find the third way that transcends the duality of victim and perpetrator, self and other, love and boundaries. The shadow figures who have catalyzed this transformation begin to appear differently as you move through the individuation process. You may find that some of them were never as powerful or threatening as they seemed when you were identified with your wounds. Others may reveal themselves to be fellow travelers on the path of consciousness, their difficult behavior masking their own process of burning away false identifications. Still, others may remain unconscious, but their impact on you diminishes as you cease to need their validation or fear their disapproval. In some cases, you may discover that relationships which seemed irreparably damaged can be renewed on entirely different terms. When you no longer need others to be different than they are, when you no longer try to save them from their own shadows or protect yourself from their projections, space opens for authentic encounter. The person who once triggered your deepest wounds may become a companion in consciousness, someone with whom you can explore the mysteries of human transformation. But this renewal is not guaranteed, nor is it necessary for your own completion. The individuation path teaches you that you are whole unto yourself, that your worth does not depend on others' recognition, that your capacity for love is not diminished by others' inability to receive it. You learn to bless those who have served as your teachers, even when they never intended to teach, even when the lessons came wrapped in pain. The dance with darkness that emerges from this process is both subtle and profound. You no longer fear the shadow aspects of yourself or others because you understand their role in the larger pattern of transformation. You can witness anger without being consumed by it, encounter manipulation without being manipulated, experience rejection without being diminished by it. You have learned to dance with these energies without being swept away by them, to use their motion for your own movement toward wholeness. This is not indifference or detachment, but a deeper form of engagement, one that honors the sacred nature of each person's journey while maintaining clear boundaries around your own. You become like a skilled dancer who can partner with many different styles of movement without losing their own rhythm, who can respond to the music of relationship without being overwhelmed by its tempo or intensity. The rising from the ashes is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of regeneration. Each new encounter, each fresh challenge, each unexpected wound offers another opportunity for the phoenix to rise. You begin to understand that individuation is not a destination, but a way of being, not an achievement, but an ongoing commitment to consciousness, not a final state, but a continuous process of becoming. As you embody this understanding, you become a different kind of presence in the world. Others sense in you a quality of authenticity that draws them toward their own truth. Your very being becomes an invitation for others to drop their masks, to step out of their roles, to risk the vulnerability of showing up as they truly are. You become living proof that it is possible to survive the death of the false self, that there is treasure to be found in the ashes of encounter, that the phoenix path is not only possible, but inevitable for those who choose consciousness over comfort. The wisdom that emerges from this individuation process is not theoretical but experiential, not borrowed but earned through the fire of direct encounter. You have learned that love without boundaries is not love but fusion, that boundaries without love are not protection but prison, that the path to authentic relationship leads through the valley of the shadow of the false self. You understand, now that the shadow figures were never your enemies but your allies in disguise, never obstacles to your happiness but catalysts for your awakening, never problems to be solved but mysteries to be lived. They have been the unwitting servants of your own becoming, the unconscious midwives of your rebirth, the sacred fire that burned away everything that was not eternally, authentically, undeniably you. In this rising, you discover that what you thought was your greatest weakness, your sensitivity to others' energy, your capacity to be wounded, your need for authentic connection, was actually your greatest strength. These qualities, when purified by fire, become the very instruments of your service to the world. Your sensitivity becomes discernment. Your capacity to be wounded becomes compassion. Your need for connection becomes the ability to create space for others' authentic expression. The phoenix that rises from the ashes of encounter is not invulnerable, but invincible, not because it cannot be hurt, but because it cannot be destroyed. It has learned the secret of regeneration, the art of transformation, the wisdom of using every experience as fuel for the fire of becoming. It understands that pain is not the enemy of joy, but its teacher, that darkness is not the opposite of light but its background, that death is not the end of life but its renewal. This is the gift of the individuation path, not the promise of a life without difficulties, but the assurance that difficulties will serve your deepest purpose, not the guarantee of relationships without shadows, but the capacity to dance with shadows without being consumed by them, not the end of the journey, but the beginning of conscious participation in the eternal process of becoming who you have always been, beneath the masks, beyond the roles, within the sacred fire that burns away everything false to reveal everything true. You stand now at the threshold of the great mystery, the sacred death that births authentic life. Here, in the smouldering ruins of what you once believed yourself to be, the phoenix of your true nature prepares to rise. The shadow figures who have crossed your path, those difficult souls who have triggered your deepest wounds and exposed your most carefully guarded secrets, have served as unwitting midwives to your rebirth. They have been the flames that consumed your false identifications, the sacred fire that burned away everything that was not truly you. This is individuation, not the comfortable growth of adding new qualities to an existing self, but the radical transformation that occurs when the ego's cherished illusions are stripped away, leaving only the eternal essence that has always been your truest nature. It is the alchemical process Jung recognized as the soul's deepest calling, the movement from the collective unconscious toward the unique expression of your individual wholeness. Each encounter with these shadow bearers has been an initiation, a ritual death that prepares you for resurrection. When they dismissed your deepest truths, they forced you to discover what remains when external validation is withdrawn. When they projected their wounds onto you, they revealed the places where you had been unconsciously carrying the projections of others. When they demanded that you betray your authentic nature to maintain relationship, they offered you the ultimate gift, the opportunity to choose yourself, perhaps for the first time in your life. The pain of these encounters has been the labor pain of your own birth, just as the physical birth requires the breaking of waters, the contraction of muscles, the passage through the narrow canal of transformation. Your psychological birth has required the breaking of old patterns, the contraction of what seemed stable, the passage through the narrow places where only truth can survive. You have been both the mother and the child in this process, both the one who labors and the one who is born. In the beginning, you may have interpreted these difficult relationships as evidence of your failure, your unworthiness, your inability to love or be loved. The ego, terrified of its own dissolution, creates elaborate stories to explain why these encounters feel so threatening. It tells you that if only you were different, more patient, more understanding, more giving, these relationships would transform into the harmonious connections you long for. It does not yet understand that the very difficulty of these encounters is their gift, that the friction is the fire that burns away the false self. But as you move deeper into the individuation process, you begin to recognize these encounters as sacred appointments with your own becoming. Each person who has challenged you, frustrated you, or wounded you has been a teacher in disguise, pointing toward the aspects of yourself that were ready for transformation. The narcissist who could never truly see you revealed where you had been looking for yourself in the mirror of others' recognition. The critic who diminished your accomplishments showed you where you had been seeking worth through external achievement. The one who demanded your energy without reciprocation illuminated the places where you had been giving from emptiness rather than fullness. The fire of these encounters burns with different intensities at different stages of the journey. Sometimes it is the slow burn of chronic frustration, the steady heat that gradually transforms coal into diamond. Sometimes it is the sudden conflagration that consumes everything in its path, leaving you standing naked in the ashes of what you once believed about yourself and others. Both forms of fire serve the same purpose: the purification of consciousness, the separation of the essential from the superficial, the gold from the dross. As the false personas begin to fall away, you may experience what feels like a loss of identity. The masks you have worn, the good child, the responsible adult, the understanding friend, the selfless partner, have provided not only protection but also a sense of who you are. Without them, you may feel exposed, uncertain, even terrified. Who are you if not the roles you have played? What remains when the audience for your performance disappears? This is the dark night of the soul that precedes authentic selfhood. In this darkness, you must learn to trust what cannot be seen, to rely on what cannot be proven, to believe in what cannot be grasped by the rational mind. You must learn to sit with the uncomfortable truth that you are more than any role you have played, more than any story you have told about yourself, more than any identity you have constructed from the fragments of others' expectations. The phoenix that rises from these ashes is not the improved version of who you were before. It is an entirely different order of being. Where once you sought to be loved, you now seek to love from the overflow of self-acceptance. Where once you feared rejection, you now understand that those who cannot see your true nature are simply not your people. Where once you tried to fix or change others, you now hold space for their own journey while remaining firmly rooted in your own. This transformation is not achieved through effort or willpower, but through surrender. The willingness to let the fire do its work, to trust the process even when it seems destructive, to allow the old self to die so that the new self can be born. It requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposing forces without collapsing into either extreme, to remain conscious in the face of unconscious pull, to find the third way that transcends the duality of victim and perpetrator, self and other, love and boundaries. The shadow figures who have catalyzed this transformation begin to appear differently as you move through the individuation process. You may find that some of them were never as powerful or threatening as they seemed when you were identified with your wounds. Others may reveal themselves to be fellow travelers on the path of consciousness, their difficult behavior masking their own process of burning away false identifications. Still others may remain unconscious, but their impact on you diminishes as you cease to need their validation or fear their disapproval. In some cases, you may discover that relationships which seemed irreparably damaged can be renewed on entirely different terms. When you no longer need others to be different than they are, when you no longer try to save them from their own shadows or protect yourself from their projections, space opens for authentic encounter. The person who once triggered your deepest wounds may become a companion in consciousness, someone with whom you can explore the mysteries of human transformation. But this renewal is not guaranteed, nor is it necessary for your own completion. The individuation path teaches you that you are whole unto yourself, that your worth does not depend on others' recognition, that your capacity for love is not diminished by others' inability to receive it. You learn to bless those who have served as your teachers even when they never intended to teach, even when the lessons came wrapped in pain. The dance with darkness that emerges from this process is both subtle and profound. You no longer fear the shadow aspects of yourself or others because you understand their role in the larger pattern of transformation. You can witness anger without being consumed by it, encounter manipulation without being manipulated, experience rejection without being diminished by it. You have learned to dance with these energies without being swept away by them, to use their motion for your own movement toward wholeness. This is not indifference or detachment, but a deeper form of engagement, one that honors the sacred nature of each person's journey while maintaining clear boundaries around your own. You become like a skilled dancer who can partner with many different styles of movement without losing their own rhythm, who can respond to the music of relationship without being overwhelmed by its tempo or intensity. The rising from the ashes is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of regeneration. Each new encounter, each fresh challenge, each unexpected wound offers another opportunity for the phoenix to rise. You begin to understand that individuation is not a destination, but a way of being, not an achievement, but an ongoing commitment to consciousness, not a final state, but a continuous process of becoming. As you embody this understanding, you become a different kind of presence in the world. Others sense in you a quality of authenticity that draws them toward their own truth. Your very being becomes an invitation for others to drop their masks, to step out of their roles, to risk the vulnerability of showing up as they truly are. You become living proof that it is possible to survive the death of the false self, that there is treasure to be found in the ashes of encounter, that the phoenix path is not only possible, but inevitable for those who choose consciousness over comfort. The wisdom that emerges from this individuation process is not theoretical, but experiential, not borrowed, but earned through the fire of direct encounter. You have learned that love without boundaries is not love, but fusion, that boundaries without love are not protection, but prison, that the path to authentic relationship leads through the valley of the shadow of the false self. You understand now that the shadow figures were never your enemies, but your allies in disguise, never obstacles to your happiness, but catalysts for your awakening, never problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. They have been the unwitting servants of your own becoming, the unconscious midwives of your rebirth, the sacred fire that burned away everything that was not eternally, authentically, undeniably you. In this rising, you discover that what you thought was your greatest weakness, your sensitivity to others' energy, your capacity to be wounded, your need for authentic connection, was actually your greatest strength. These qualities, when purified by fire, become the very instruments of your service to the world. Your sensitivity becomes discernment. Your capacity to be wounded becomes compassion. Your need for connection becomes the ability to create space for others' authentic expression. The phoenix that rises from the ashes of encounter is not invulnerable, but invincible, not because it cannot be hurt, but because it cannot be destroyed. It has learned the secret of regeneration, the art of transformation, the wisdom of using every experience as fuel for the fire of becoming. It understands that pain is not the enemy of joy, but its teacher, that darkness is not the opposite of light, but its background, that death is not the end of life, but its renewal. This is the gift of the individuation path, not the promise of a life without difficulties, but the assurance that difficulties will serve your deepest purpose, not the guarantee of relationships without shadows, but the capacity to dance with shadows without being consumed by them, not the end of the journey, but the beginning of conscious participation in the eternal process of becoming who you have always been beneath the masks, beyond the roles, within the sacred fire that burns away everything false to reveal everything true. You have ascended now to the summit of psychological development, where the air is thin and the view encompasses all that you have traveled through. From this vantage point, the dwelling place of the integrated self, the landscape of your journey appears transformed. What once seemed like a battlefield strewn with enemies now reveals itself as a sacred mandala, each difficult encounter a perfectly placed element in the larger pattern of your becoming. The archetypal figures who once loomed as threats now stand revealed as servants of a wholeness so vast that your smaller self could never have comprehended its design. Here, in this rarefied atmosphere of integration, you are no longer the ego, that seeks to control and dominate. No longer the wounded child crying for justice. No longer the defensive adult armored against pain. You have become the wise witness, the one who can hold all aspects of human experience with the same compassionate awareness that the sky holds both storm and sunshine, that the ocean embraces both wave and stillness, that the earth receives both seed and decay with equal grace. This integrated self is not something you have achieved or acquired. It is something you have remembered, something you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and wounding. It is the eternal within you that has watched your entire drama unfold, the unchanging awareness that has been present through every joy and sorrow, every expansion and contraction, every meeting and parting. It is what Jung called the self with a capital S, not the small self of personality, but the vast self of essence, not the self that seeks, but the self that simply is. From this perspective, you begin to see how each of the archetypal figures who crossed your path served the greater purpose of your integration. The critic who diminished your worth forced you to discover worth that could not be diminished. The narcissist who could never truly see you taught you to see yourself with clarity and compassion. The manipulator who tried to control your responses developed your capacity for authentic choice. The victim who drained your energy showed you the difference between genuine compassion and codependent rescue. The aggressor who attacked your boundaries helped you discover the warrior within who could protect what is sacred. The abandoner who withdrew their presence revealed the unshakable presence that resides within your own being. Each of these encounters was a teaching disguised as a trial, a gift wrapped in the paper of pain. They came not to destroy you, but to forge you, not to diminish you, but to reveal dimensions of yourself that could only emerge under pressure, like carbon transforming into diamond, like ore becoming gold, like caterpillar dissolving into butterfly. You have been transformed through the very experiences that seem designed to break you. The wisdom of the integrated self sees through the surface drama to the deeper patterns at work. It recognizes that the universe is not random but intelligent, not chaotic but purposeful, not hostile but deeply, mysteriously benevolent in its commitment to consciousness. Every encounter, no matter how painful, has served the evolution of awareness. Every wound has been a doorway to compassion. Every betrayal has been an invitation to self-reliance. Every abandonment has been a call to come home to yourself. This does not mean that you condone harmful behavior or excuse unconscious actions. The integrated self is not naive about the reality of human shadow or the genuine pain that unconscious people can inflict. But it holds a larger view that encompasses both the human drama and the divine comedy, both the personal story and the transpersonal purpose that moves through all stories. It can acknowledge the wound while celebrating the wisdom it has brought, honor the pain while recognizing the gift it has delivered. In this state of integration, you discover that you no longer need these archetypal figures to be different than they are. The critic's criticism no longer has the power to devastate because your worth is no longer dependent on external validation. The narcissist's self-absorption no longer feels like a personal rejection because you understand it as a symptom of their disconnection from their own depths. The manipulator's games no longer ensnare you because you have learned to trust your own inner guidance above all external pressure. This freedom from needing others to change is perhaps the greatest gift of integration. It allows you to engage with all types of people from a place of choice rather than compulsion, curiosity rather than reactivity, compassion rather than judgment. You can appreciate the critic's attention to detail while not taking their harshness personally. You can acknowledge the narcissist's charisma while not losing yourself in their gravitational pull. You can recognize the manipulator's intelligence while not becoming a player in their games. The integrated self has developed what might be called archetypal immunity. not the inability to be affected by others, but the capacity to remain centered in your own truth regardless of what energies surround you. Like a tree that bends with the wind but is not uprooted by it, like a mountain that allows storms to pass over without being moved by them, you have learned to remain stable in your essential nature while allowing the energies of others to flow around and through you without being disturbed by them. This immunity is not armor, but transparency, not hardness, but flexibility, not resistance, but flow. It comes from understanding that others' behaviors are information about their inner state, not verdicts about your worth. When someone criticizes, you can receive the useful information while releasing the destructive charge. When someone manipulates, you can recognize the strategy while refusing to participate in the game. When someone abandons, you can feel the sadness while not making it mean anything about your lovability. From the vantage point of integration, you begin to see the profound intelligence of your own journey. Every person you have attracted, every situation you have encountered, every challenge you have faced has been perfectly designed to develop the qualities your soul most needed to cultivate. If you needed to learn boundaries, you attracted boundary violators. If you needed to develop self-worth, you encountered those who would challenge your worth. If you needed to find your voice, you met those who would try to silence you. This is not victim blaming, but wisdom recognizing. The understanding that at the soul level, we are all participants in a vast curriculum of consciousness, all students and teachers in the University of Human Experience. The integrated self can hold this paradox, that we are responsible for our response to what happens while not being responsible for what happens, that we attract what we need for our growth while not deserving what causes us pain, that we are both utterly vulnerable and completely invulnerable, both fully human and essentially divine. The battlefield of relationship transforms into a dance floor when seen from this integrated perspective. The same people who once seemed like adversaries now appear as dance partners, each bringing their own style and rhythm to the eternal dance of consciousness, knowing itself through interaction. Some partners are graceful, some are clumsy, some step on your toes, some sweep you off your feet, but all serve the greater purpose of teaching you how to dance with life itself. This transformation of perception is perhaps the most profound healing of all. Where once you saw separation, you now see connection. Where once you experienced conflict, you now recognize the play of opposites that creates the dynamic tension necessary for growth. Where once you felt like a victim of circumstances, you now understand yourself as a co-creator of experience, a conscious participant in the eternal process of becoming. The integrated self lives in what might be called perpetual gratitude, not the superficial positivity that denies difficulty, but the deep appreciation that comes from understanding how even the most challenging experiences have served your evolution. This gratitude is not dependent on circumstances, but arises from the recognition that life itself is the greatest gift, that consciousness is the most precious treasure, that the opportunity to learn and grow and love is the ultimate blessing. In this state of integration, you become a healing presence in the world. Without trying to fix or save anyone, your very being radiates a quality of wholeness that gives others permission to discover their own integration. Your presence becomes a reminder that it is possible to hold all of life with compassion, to remain centered in the midst of chaos, to find meaning in the midst of apparent meaninglessness. You understand now that the work of integration is never complete, that each day brings new opportunities to apply your wisdom, to deepen your compassion, to expand your capacity to hold paradox. The integrated self is not a static achievement, but a dynamic process, not a destination, but a way of traveling, not a state, but a stance toward life. From this summit, you can see the entire journey, every valley of despair, every mountain of triumph, every river of tears, every desert of loneliness, and you can see how each element was necessary, how each experience was sacred, how each encounter was holy. You can see that you have never been alone, that you have never been separate, that you have never been anything other than love, learning to recognize itself in all its myriad forms. The archetypal figures continue to appear in your life, but now you greet them as old friends wearing familiar masks. You recognize their patterns, appreciate their teachings, and respond from the vast space of your integrated wholeness. They no longer have the power to trigger unconscious reactions because there is no longer an unconscious part of you that needs to react. There is only the witness, the one who watches with compassion, the one who responds with wisdom, the one who loves without condition while maintaining perfect discernment about what serves life and what does not. YouTube video description, Dewey. This profound exploration of Carl Jung's depth psychology, we journey into the twilight realm where consciousness meets the shadow, that underground river of all we have rejected about ourselves. Jung understood that our most difficult relationships are not random encounters, but sacred appointments with our own psychological evolution. The 6 archetypal figures we encounter, the eternal child, devouring mother, rigid patriarch, emotional, vampire, grandiose narcissist, and chaos maker, emerge from the collective unconscious as our greatest teachers disguised as our most challenging adversaries. These shadow projections force us to confront the aspects of ourselves we have banished to the basement of consciousness. Through the alchemical fire of difficult relationships, we undergo what Jung called individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. Each encounter strips away our personas, revealing the authentic self beneath. The pain serves as transformation, burning away false identifications to reveal our essential nature. From the integrated self's perspective, these archetypal figures transform from enemies into dance partners in consciousness. We develop archetypal immunity, not armor against others, but the transparent strength to remain centered in our truth, while allowing life's energies to flow through us. This is the profound gift of shadow work. Discovering that our most challenging relationships are breadcrumbs on the path to wholeness, leading us deeper into the forest of our own psyche toward the treasure of authentic selfhood. What archetypal figures have appeared as teachers in your life? Share your journey of shadow integration in the comments below. Hashtags: Carl Jung, One Shadow Work, Individuation, Jungian Psychology, Collective Unconscious, Archetypal Psychology, Persona and Shadow, Psychological Transformation, Depth Psychology, Self-Integration,